Night has settled over Nazareth, and in a small stone house, the day's sounds have faded, leaving one young woman alone with the gentle flicker of a single oil lamp. So before you fully relax, take a moment to like and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy this. Leave a comment with your location and time. I love seeing where everyone is listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe let a fan hum softly. And let's begin tonight's journey. Outside, the lanes are almost empty. A donkey shifts in its sleep by a courtyard wall. Somewhere, a door closes softly. Above the flat rooftops, the sky lies deep and dark, sprinkled with quiet stars. Inside, the room is simple. A low wooden table, folded blankets, clay jars by the wall, and the thin golden circle of light that spills from the lamp at Mary's side. She moves slowly through the small space, setting away the last cup, smoothing a blanket, checking how much oil remains in the lamp's clay dish. Her hands know each object without thinking. She has done this at the end of so many days. Her mind, however, does not rest. It wanders to her family, to Joseph, to the weight of taxes and the distant power of Rome, to whispers of what the future might demand of her. Mary sits down near the lamp and folds her hands loosely in her lap. The room is quiet enough that she can hear her own breathing, a little quick from the leftover press of the day. You may know that feeling too, when the noise outside finally fades. But inside your chest, the thoughts keep circling, asking questions you cannot quite name, let alone answer. That is when the room begins to feel different. The lamp does not flare. The walls do not shake. There is no sudden wind through the doorway. Instead, the air seems to grow still and clear, like water settling after it has been stirred. Light gathers, not from the flame, but in one calm place in the room, steady and gentle, as if dawn has quietly arrived indoors. In that soft brightness stands a figure, unfamiliar and yet not frightening. Mary's heart leaps, and she is deeply troubled, as Luke tells in 1:29. She is from Nazareth, a village that barely appears on any important map. She has no title, no position, nothing that would explain why a messenger from heaven would stand in her simple house. But the voice that breaks the silence is strong and kind, like a firm hand resting on a trembling shoulder. "Greetings, you who are highly favored," he says. "The Lord is with you." The words sound too large for the small room. Highly favored, the Lord with her. Mary glances at her own hands, marked by work, then back at the messenger. The distance between who she feels she is and what he calls her seems wide and impossible. She does not run, but confusion and unease move through her like a shadow. Seeing it in her eyes, the angel speaks again, his tone even softer. "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God." The words do not erase every trace of fear, but they lay something warm and steady over it, the way a blanket is laid over cold shoulders. He tells her that she will conceive and give birth to a son, and she is to call him Jesus. He will be great. He will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of David, and his kingdom will never end. Each phrase settles over the room like another layer of light. Beautiful and almost more than any ordinary evening should be able to carry. Mary does not argue, but she does speak. Her question rises honest and clear, the way questions do when they come from someone who knows the shape of her own life. "How will this be?" she asks. "Since I am a virgin?" It is not defiance, only truth. You may have asked something similar in your own heart, How could hope come here? How can anything new grow in a place that feels small, tired, or already decided? The angel answers without hurry. The Holy Spirit will come upon her. The power of the Most High will overshadow her. The child to be born will be holy. He will be called the Son of God. His words carry mystery, but not threat. To steady her further, he speaks of Elizabeth, her relative, who was once called barren and is now in her 6th month. What seemed impossible is already quietly unfolding in another house, under another roof. For no word from God will ever fail, he says, as Luke 1:37 gently reminds us. Mary stands in that promise, the lamplight and the angel's glow mingling around her. The future still looks larger than her understanding. She still does not know how each step will unfold, how people will speak, how her life will change. But she has learned something deeper than her fear, that she is seen, that she is favored, that God has stepped into her small, ordinary room and spoken her name with care. You may be lying in your own room tonight with your own unanswered questions stretching ahead of you. Like Mary, you may not receive a full map. But this story offers another anchor, that God can enter simple spaces and regard ordinary people with extraordinary gentleness. Rest does not begin when every piece of the puzzle is solved. It can begin when you know you are not overlooked and not alone. At last, Mary speaks again. Her voice is quiet, but it steadies the air around her. I am the Lord's servant, she says. May your word to me be fulfilled. The sentence is short, yet it turns her gently away from the tight grip of anxiety toward trust. Her questions do not vanish, but she no longer carries them by herself. She lays them, one by one, into hands she has begun to trust more than her own understanding. The brightness in the room begins to fade, not in a sudden snap, but like evening sliding slowly into night. The messenger's presence withdraws. The familiar outlines return. The low table, the jars, the folded blankets, the rough stone of the walls. Yet the room is not exactly what it was. Something in Mary has shifted. Where worry once filled every corner, there now rests a quiet, trembling courage. She steps to the doorway and looks out. The stars above Nazareth seem closer, like watchful lamps hanging over the village. The air is cool against her face. Somewhere beyond the houses and fields, shepherds keep their own small fires, gentle points of light holding back the dark for their flocks. Mary watches for a moment, feeling that same patient care stretching over her life. When she comes back inside, her movements are slower. She spreads her blanket and lays her mat so the lamplight will fall softly, not sharply, across her face. She lies down and feels the cool clay under her hand, solid and steady. Her heart still beats a little faster than usual, but each breath she takes is deeper than the last, as if her body is slowly believing what her ears have heard. As her eyes grow heavy, she thinks of Elizabeth and the quiet miracle hidden in that distant hill country home. She thinks of the words spoken over her tonight. They are bigger than her understanding, yet they sit beside her like a gentle companion, not demanding that she solve everything before she rests. The future is wide, but this moment is simple. She is held. Outside, Nazareth sinks deeper into sleep. Inside, Mary lets her shoulders loosen and her jaw unclench. She breathes in, breathes out, and lets her weight sink fully into the mat. Her identity is no longer wrapped only in work, expectations, and fear. It is wrapped in favor and promise, given by a God who stepped into her ordinary night. Tonight, as you lie under your own blanket, you can let this same Nazareth story come close. You do not need to hold every answer. You do not need to be strong enough for every tomorrow. It may be enough, just for now, to remember that you are seen, that you are not alone, and that a gentle, steady presence keeps watch as you drift towards sleep. The first light of morning touches the hills outside Nazareth when Mary begins her journey. The village is quiet. A few roosters call into the cool air, and thin lines of smoke rise from early cooking fires. She pulls her cloak closer around her shoulders and steps onto the road that winds south toward the hill country of Judea, where Elizabeth lives. The houses fall behind her one by one, until Nazareth is only a cluster of rooftops resting against the pale sky. Stones crunch under her sandals. Dew wets the grasses along the roadside. With each step, the memory of the angel's words walks beside her. She carries them like something small but strong, tucked deep in her heart. There is a child promised, a future unfolding, and she is part of it now. Even so, questions move through her like a slow current. What will Joseph say? How will people look at her? The thoughts rise and fall with the gentle slopes she climbs. The road turns through fields and olive groves. Trees twist their branches toward the sky, their leaves whispering softly as the breeze moves through. Travelers pass now and then. A man leading a donkey loaded with baskets, a family moving together, a pair of boys running ahead, laughing in low voices. Mary nods in greeting, but her mind returns again and again to one name: Elizabeth. The angel's words about her older relative have been a steady warmth since that night in Nazareth. The one who was said to be unable to have children is now, by God's quiet work, 6 months along. There is comfort in knowing someone else has been drawn into surprising grace. You may know that feeling too. When life shifts in ways you never expected, it helps to find even one person who understands, who has walked some part of the same strange road. Mary's steps quicken when she thinks of it. The path is long, but she imagines a doorway at the end of it. A familiar voice, and the sound of welcome spilling into the open air. Days pass in a simple rhythm of walking, resting, and sleeping under shared roofs. Mary stays with relatives or in small inns along the way, where strangers share bread, water, and a bit of news from other towns. At night, she lies near faintly glowing embers, listening to the slow breathing of others around her. The sky beyond the doorways is wide and scattered with stars, not unlike the sky that watched over her in Nazareth. In these in-between places, her heart is still tender, but it begins to steady around what God has spoken. At last, the hills of Judea rise ahead, softened by late afternoon light. The path narrows, curling between stone terraces where vines grow. Sheep graze on the higher ground, and the sound of their bells carries faintly on the air. Mary draws nearer to the village where Zechariah and Elizabeth live. Her pace quickens again, fatigue and anticipation woven together, until she reaches a house with sun-warmed walls and a small courtyard where a jar of water stands ready for travelers. She calls a greeting, her voice carrying into the shaded interior. For a heartbeat, there is silence, and then footsteps approach. Elizabeth appears in the doorway, older, steady, her eyes lined with years of sorrow and now unexpected joy. The moment Mary's greeting reaches her ears, something hidden happens, just as Luke 1:41 describes. The child within Elizabeth leaps, as if recognizing a nearness only heaven could have arranged. Elizabeth stops, her hand resting on her rounded belly, and a deep, spirit-given joy rises in her like water from a fresh spring. Her voice, when it comes, is strong and full. "Blessed are you among women," she cries, "and blessed is the child you will bear. But why am I so favored, that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" Her words pour into the courtyard, wrapping around Mary like a warm cloak. For days, Mary has carried this promise largely alone. Now, far from Nazareth but close to a relative's heart, she hears her journey named and honored, and she is blessed for trusting that the Lord would fulfill his word. Two women stand facing each other, one older, one young. One visibly carrying life already far along, the other just beginning. Between them, shared wonder hums in the air. The house is still simple: clay jars, woven mats, a table for ordinary meals. Yet in this ordinary space, Mary's anxious thoughts begin to loosen. She is not the only one God has remembered. She is not walking this path alone, and the weight of the future does not rest on her shoulders by itself anymore. Mary's reply rises not just from her lips, but from deep within her spirit. She begins to praise the one whose kindness has reached her in such a small place. Her words, remembered in Luke 1:46-55, speak of mercy, of strength used gently, of the proud scattered and the humble lifted, of the hungry filled with good things. Here, in Elizabeth's home, she says that generations will call her blessed, not because of her own greatness, but because the Mighty One has done great things for her, and his mercy stretches across the years. Her song is not loud or rushed. It flows like a steady stream, clear and sure, washing away some of the fear clinging to the edges of her heart. Elizabeth listens, her eyes shining. Zechariah, still in his season of silence, moves quietly in the background, a gentle presence in the slow unfolding of God's plan. Lamps are lit as the light outside softens into evening. The smells of baking bread and simmering stew fill the house, anchoring all this mystery in the ordinary goodness of a shared meal. Over the days that follow, Mary remains with Elizabeth. Their lives fall into a calm pattern, preparing food, drawing water, tending to small tasks around the house. They talk of family and of the hopes they once whispered only in private prayers. Now those hopes have taken on shape and weight. Life inside Elizabeth grows stronger. Life inside Mary is hidden still, yet entirely real, resting in the quiet beneath her heartbeat. In quiet moments, they sit together in the courtyard, feeling the warmth of the sun on stone. Sometimes they fall silent, and the only sounds are birds in the branches. If your heart has felt unsettled, you might picture yourself seated beside them. You do not have to bring polished answers. You can simply arrive with whatever you carry and let the slower rhythm of this house steady you. At night, lamplight sinks low and the hill country grows still. Outside, the slopes lie dark and steady beneath the stars. Inside, two women drift toward sleep, held by the same mercy they praised in the daylight. This season together does not erase every difficulty, but it wraps them in companionship and quiet joy. Let that picture linger near you until your thoughts soften and your breathing follows the slow rise and fall of peaceful rest. By the time the order from Caesar reaches Nazareth, the air has turned cooler and the days a little shorter. Everyone is to be registered in his own town, as Luke explains in 2:1-3. And for Joseph, that means a journey south to Bethlehem, the city of David. Mary listens quietly as he tells her. The child within her is growing. Each movement is a reminder that the promise spoken in Nazareth is no longer just words. They set out together in the early light. Joseph walks beside the donkey, steady and watchful, while Mary rides when the path grows rough and walks when she can. The road stretches over hills and through valleys, past fields where workers bend over the soil and olive trees lift their silver leaves to the sky. Other travelers move in the same direction. Families, elders, young men carrying bundles, each with their own quiet concerns. Each evening they look for shelter, sometimes a crowded lodging room, sometimes a corner in a relative's home, sometimes a small inn. They untie bundles, share a simple meal, wash dusty feet, and ease tired bodies down to the floor, while distant voices fade into night. Through it all, Mary carries more than packs and provisions. She carries the weight and wonder of new life. Small motions inside remind her that God's word is working in ways she cannot see. There is no royal escort on this road, no carved chariot, no silk. Just two ordinary people, moving step by step toward a town whose name is known to God and sung by prophets. Bethlehem. When they finally see it, the town rests on its ridge like a cluster of sun-faded stones. But this day, it is more crowded than usual. People have come from many places to be counted. The streets are full of voices, the bray of animals, the clatter of pots. Joseph leads Mary along the narrow lanes, knocking at doors, asking after a guest room. Door after door, opens and closes. Some faces are apologetic, some simply tired. The answer, though gently given, keeps returning in the same form. There is no space. For a moment, worry presses hard. Mary feels the ache in her back, the heaviness of the child she bears. Joseph feels the weight of responsibility. You may know this tightness, the sense of arriving at what should be safety, only to find that every visible place seems already taken. Yet Joseph does not stop looking. Kindness meets them at last in a simple offer. A sheltered space where animals are kept, rough but dry, with a manger filled with hay. It is not a true guest room. The air smells of straw and earth, of wool and warm breath. But it is shelter, and for this night, shelter is enough. Joseph clears a place where the ground is softest and the straw is thick. He makes sure Mary has what little comfort he can manage. A lamp is lit, its flame gathering a calm circle of light around them. Beyond the low doorway, Bethlehem slowly quiets. The shouts of vendors fade. Footsteps lessen. A dog barks once and falls silent. Above the roof, the sky stretches dark and clear, holding steady stars that look down on this overlooked corner. In that quiet shelter, at a time only God perfectly knows, the child is born. Luke tells it with simple words. She gives birth to her firstborn, a son. She wraps him in cloths and lays him in a manger, because there is no guest room available, as Luke 2:7 says. There are no trumpets, no palace attendants, no embroidered cradle. Mary's hands are tired but gentle. Joseph's eyes are bright with concern and relief. The manger, meant for animal feed, becomes the first resting place of the one who will invite the weary to rest. The room grows still. The animals shift softly. The lamp flame moves in a small, steady dance, casting warm light over rough beams and stone. Mary looks at the child's face, so small and calm, his breathing soft and even. All the difficulty of the road, every closed door, seems to gather here and lose its sharpness in the presence of this quiet, living promise. Some distance away, under the open sky, shepherds keep watch over their flocks. A few small fires glow on the hillsides, and the sheep move in gentle clusters, Suddenly the sky is filled with a light they have never seen. An angel stands among them, and fear grips their hearts. But the message is clear and kind. Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. The sign they are given is simple and surprising. A baby wrapped in cloths, lying in a manger. Not in a hall guarded by soldiers, not in a chamber of gold, in a place where men who smell like smoke and sheep can walk in without shame. The sky bursts into praise and then settles again into quiet. The shepherds look at one another, their fears slowly giving way to wonder. They decide to go and see. Leaving their fires, they walk through the sleeping town until they find the small shelter. There, just as they were told, they see Mary, Joseph, and the baby lying in the manger. Their words tumble out in soft excitement as they tell what they have heard and seen. Joseph listens, amazed. Mary listens too, and she treasures their words, tucking them deep into her heart beside the memory of Nazareth and the long, uncertain journey. Later, the shepherds go back to their fields. The work will be the same, watching, guarding, counting sheep. But something in them has quieted. They have seen that God's nearness chose a low place, a humble bed of hay. Ordinary ground has become holy under their feet. As the night in Bethlehem deepens, the small shelter grows calmer. The child sleeps. Mary's eyelids grow heavy. Joseph keeps a gentle, fading watch, his head nodding as fatigue finally overtakes him. Outside, the town lies under a still, starlit sky, unaware that the one who will be called Prince of Peace rests in its most modest corner. If your heart feels crowded with questions tonight, you might picture this room. Stone walls, a rough beam overhead, a small lamp, and a baby breathing quietly in a manger. Let that picture sit beside you as you breathe a little more slowly. Like the hay that holds the child, may the mercy beneath your life hold you too, until the day's sharp edges soften and you can drift into a gentle, unhurried sleep. Each year, when the festival drew near, the roads toward Jerusalem filled with travelers. Families from towns and villages all across the region would gather their belongings, pack bread and dried fruit, fill skins with water, and join their kin on the journey. Mary and Joseph were among them, walking in a familiar rhythm that had become part of the pattern of their years, as Luke tells in 2:41-42. This time the child Jesus walked with them, no longer an infant in Bethlehem's manger, but a boy of 12. His steps were steady, his eyes bright as he watched the flow of people, a stream of neighbors and relatives, old friends and new faces, all moving toward the city that had anchored their stories for generations. The days on the road were long, but not harsh. Dust rose under their feet and settled on cloaks and sandals. At midday, the company rested beneath groves of trees or in patches of shade along the way, sharing simple food. Children ran ahead, then back, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Older travelers moved more slowly, leaning on staffs, grateful for company and the steady pace of the group. Jesus listened to conversations around him, stories of past festivals, remembered prayers, fragments of psalms softly recited as they walked. At night, the sky above their resting places opened wide, scattered with stars. Fires dotted the encampment, like small echoes of that same heaven-born light that once shone over Bethlehem. Mary would glance at her son's sleeping form, his face relaxed in the flicker of firelight, and remember the quiet birth, the shepherds' voices, the words she had stored in her heart. When they finally reached Jerusalem, the city seemed to gather all that movement into itself. The temple rose high, its courts buzzing with voices. Pilgrims wove their way through streets lined with stalls. Baskets of figs and dates, jars of oil, bundles of herbs, doves in cages, lambs led by cords. The scent of bread, spices, and incense mingled in the air. Mary, Joseph, and Jesus moved with their group, staying together in the swirl of sound and color. For several days, they took part in the festival. They went up to the temple, joined in prayers, listened to readings from Scripture. Jesus watched, absorbing the patterns, the rise and fall of voices, the questions whispered, the answers given. The way some faces seemed worn by worry, even in this place of worship, something in him was drawn, again and again, to the house that was called his Father's. When the days of the feast were over, their group prepared to return home. It was common for relatives and neighbors to travel together, children moving among the familiar adults. Joseph assumed Jesus was with Mary. Mary assumed he was with cousins or friends. The caravan stretched along the road like a long, quiet line, leaving the city behind as evening light slipped across the hills. Only after some hours did Mary look for her son and not see him. She checked among the younger boys. No sign. She asked a cousin, then a neighbor. Joseph moved from cluster to cluster, his brow beginning to tighten. Word passed quietly along the line. "Have you seen Jesus? Did he walk ahead with you?" He was nowhere in the caravan. The worry that rose in Mary's chest came quickly, but not wildly. She knew this child. She knew his gentleness, his attention, his quiet depth. She also knew the weight of responsibility that lay on her and Joseph, not only as any parents, but as those entrusted with this particular life. Joseph's jaw set in determined lines. They turned back toward Jerusalem, leaving the safety of the group to retrace their steps under a sky now edging toward night. You may recognize something of your own heart in that moment. The tightening inside when someone you love seems out of reach. When what you assumed was safe suddenly feels uncertain. The city, when they re-entered it, had shifted into its evening mood. Lanterns glowed behind latticework. Voices floated from upper rooms. Mary and Joseph searched the places they had been, the streets they had walked, the markets where they had bought bread, the courtyards where they had rested. Night came and passed. Another day began. For 3 days, Luke tells us, they looked for him. Their search was not frantic in a way that broke them, but it pressed heavily on them. They asked questions, scanned faces, walked and walked. Jerusalem is full of paths, corners, and stairways. Jesus could be in any one of them, or in none. At last they turned to the temple again. Its courts lay broad and solid, stones warmed by the sun. There, among the teachers, they found him. Jesus was seated, listening and asking questions. The men around him, learned and accustomed to teaching, were astonished at his understanding and his replies. But Mary's first feeling was not admiration. It was relief. There he was, safe, not lost, not harmed. Her shoulders eased, though they still carried the residue of days spent searching. She stepped forward, her voice carrying the honest mixture of love and pain any mother might feel. "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." She names what has been true in her body and mind, anxiety, searching, the ache of not knowing. Jesus looks at her and Joseph with clear eyes. "Why were you searching for me?" he asks. "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" His words are not harsh, but they reach beyond the simple worry of the moment into something deeper. The reality that his life is rooted in a purpose that stretches farther than any journey to Jerusalem and back. Mary and Joseph do not fully understand. They hear his answer, but its full meaning lies beyond their present reach. So they do the most ordinary, faithful thing they can. They bring him home. Jesus returns with them to Nazareth, and Luke says he is obedient to them. He grows in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and people. The story that seemed dangerously open for 3 days settles back into a steady path, watched over from above. Mary stores these things in her heart, adding them to the memories she already keeps. Nazareth's lamp-lit room, Bethlehem's manger, the shepherd's words, the journey, the search, the temple, her son's answer. She cannot arrange them all into a perfect pattern, but she carries them like small polished stones in a pouch, each one a reminder that God has not lost hold of the story, even when she has felt lost inside it. As night falls on Nazareth again, life seems simple on the surface. A household prepares a meal, checks water jars, sweeps dust from the floor. Children settle onto mats, and lamps are shaded. Yet beneath that ordinariness lies a quiet assurance. Even the days that feel like wandering can end in being found, in discovering that the one you feared was far away has been in the Father's care all along. If you think back on your own years, you might see seasons that felt like those 3 days in Jerusalem, times when you did not know where rest or answer could be found. Perhaps you are in such a season now. This story whispers that while you search, while you ask, while your thoughts circle the same questions, you are still held inside a larger faithfulness that does not misplace you. So as you lie where you are tonight, let the image of that temple courtyard rest gently in your mind. Solid stones underfoot, late light on columns, a boy found safe among teachers, his parents' shoulders slowly relaxing. Let that scene sit quietly beside your breathing until your chest loosens and your thoughts, once scattered like travelers on many roads, begin to gather and grow calm. And as they do, you can allow yourself to sink a little deeper into the surface beneath you, trusting that even in your unspoken questions, you are not alone. Nazareth wakes slowly as morning light spills into its narrow lanes. The air carries the smell of baking bread and damp earth from courtyards where water has just been drawn. Children's voices start as soft murmurs and rise into clearer calls as families step into their day. At the center of this ordinary rhythm stands a simple building of stone, the synagogue, where neighbors gather to hear the scriptures and to pray. On this Sabbath, benches and floor mats begin to fill. Men take their usual places, elders near the front, younger ones behind them. Women sit where they can see and hear. A child leans against a pillar, tracing the lines of the stone with a finger while keeping one ear on every word. The rustle of clothing and the quiet shifting of sandals on the floor fade as the service begins. Jesus has come home to Nazareth. He has been teaching in other synagogues across Galilee, and his words have left people amazed, as Luke 4:15 notes. But here, in the village where he grew up, he is not a stranger. Many remember him as a boy running these lanes, helping Joseph with wood and tools, carrying finished pieces through the streets. They know the tilt of his head when he listens, the way his hands move when he works. He stands among them now, no longer only the carpenter's son, yet still the neighbor they have known for years. The attendant brings him the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. The parchment is carefully unrolled, the faint crackle of it carrying through the room. Eyes follow his hands as he searches for a passage, the way one might look for a favorite psalm or a familiar line of comfort. He finds the place and begins to read. His voice is not loud, but it is clear and even, each word given enough space to rest in the room. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The words of Isaiah flow over the listeners, deep and old, yet sharp and present. Many have heard them before. Some could recite them themselves. They speak of good news to the poor, of release, of healing, of freedom, of favor. A time when God's kindness would draw near in a way that loosens burdens and straightens bowed backs. In that room, there are people who know what it is to feel poor in more than one way. Poor in coin, poor in strength, poor in hope. There are those who feel as though they live in a kind of quiet prison, limited by circumstances they did not choose. There are eyes that strain to see clearly, hearts that long to be released from the weight of worry or shame. Even if no one says it aloud, the promise in these words settles into their unspoken places. Jesus finishes reading and rolls up the scroll. He hands it back to the attendant and sits down, as was the custom when a teacher was ready to speak. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue are fastened on him. Luke 4:20 tells us. The rustle of movement has stopped. The air itself seems to lean in to listen. He begins with a sentence that is both simple and vast. Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. Today, not only in some far-off future or in stories about long-ago ancestors, but in this very gathering, within these familiar walls, among people who know the hardness of life and the smallness of their own town. The words of comfort and release Isaiah once carried now find fresh life in the voice of a man they have watched grow from childhood. At first, everyone speaks well of him. They marvel at the gracious words coming from his lips. Gracious. Words that carry grace, that bend toward them with kindness, that do not crush or belittle. Some whisper to each other, "Isn't this Joseph's son?" Their questions are not only doubt, they are also wonder. How could someone from a place like Nazareth be the bearer of such news? In this moment, nothing in the room looks grand. The synagogue walls are plain. The benches are worn smooth by years of use. Light filters in through small openings, leaving soft shapes on the floor. Yet into this very ordinariness comes a declaration that the poor, the captive, the blind, and the oppressed are seen and valued. You may know what it is to feel overlooked, as if the world's important things happen elsewhere. In bigger cities, in more famous families, in lives that look, from a distance, more impressive than your own. Nazareth knew that feeling. Yet here, the one who reads Isaiah speaks of God's favor in a place the wider world barely notices. As the gathering ends, people step outside into the sunlight. The stone walls release their stored warmth into the air. Conversations form in little knots. Some talk about the passage Jesus read. Others repeat his phrase, "Today this scripture is fulfilled," turning it over like a small stone in the hand, feeling its weight. Life will go on, fields to tend, bread to bake, children to guide, accounts to settle. Yet something has shifted beneath all these tasks. If you are listening tonight with an anxious heart, you might imagine yourself seated on one of those benches in Nazareth. Feel the smoothness of the wood under your hands, the steady weight of the stone walls around you, the gentle drift of light across the floor. Hear the words of Isaiah spoken again, not as a distant promise, but as a living comfort. Good news for the poor in spirit, freedom for places inside you that feel confined, clearer sight where things once seemed only dark, release where pressure has been heavy. You do not have to understand every part of how that fulfillment comes. It may be enough, for now, to know that the same Jesus who read those words looks with kindness on small places and worn-out people. Let that thought rest beside you as the night deepens. Breathe slowly, as if you are in that quiet synagogue long after the crowd has gone, when only a lamp or two still burns and the stones hold the leftover warmth of the day. In that stillness, your worries can set down their sharp edges. Your heart, like that gathered community, can sit in the presence of a gentle promise and begin, very simply, to rest. By late afternoon, the light over the lake begins to soften. The surface of the water, busy with small boats and moving shadows throughout the day, calms into longer, gentler ripples. Nets are drawn in and laid out to dry. Voices around Capernaum's shoreline grow lower as the press of work eases. Smoke rises from cooking fires near the houses, thin gray lines climbing into the deepening sky. Just beyond the shore stands Simon's house, its walls warmed by years of sun and wind. Inside, the air is not calm. A woman lies on a mat, her skin hot, her breath quick and shallow. This is Simon's mother-in-law. And Luke, chapter 4:38 tells us she is suffering from a high fever. The room holds the faint smell of crushed herbs, of damp cloths wrung out and laid across her forehead, of worry that has lingered for hours. Family members move quietly around her. They have done what they can. Cool water offered in small sips, whispered prayers, careful hands adjusting her blanket. Outside, footsteps sound in the courtyard. Simon and the others have returned from the synagogue, where earlier that day Jesus taught with authority and rebuked an unclean spirit, leaving the gathered ones amazed and a little hushed. As Simon steps into the house, concern replaces the settled focus he carried in the synagogue. He sees the tightness in the faces of those inside, hears the uneven sound of the sick woman's breathing. They tell Jesus about her at once. Their words are simple, but they hold a pleading that needs no long explanation. Jesus moves toward her mat. The room is small, but he does not rush. The fever is real. The heaviness in the air is real. He bends over her, close enough to see the fine lines of strain around her eyes, the way her hands twist the edge of the blanket. Luke notes it simply. He rebukes the fever, and it leaves her. The change is not loud or dramatic. There is no shattering noise, no shaking of the walls. Instead, there is a shift, like a tight knot loosening. The heat drains from her skin. Her breathing, which has been shallow and raspy, deepens into calmer, steadier pulls of air. Color returns gently to her face. She sits up. The mat that felt like a boundary between her and the rest of the house becomes just a place where she had been resting. She stands as strength flows back into her body like cool water into a dry jar. Without needing to be asked, she begins to serve them, moving through the room with the practiced ease of someone who has made meals and prepared spaces for guests most of her life. Her service is not hurried or frantic. It is a quiet, grateful offering that turns the house from a place overshadowed by illness into a place of hospitality and warmth. The sun dips lower, sliding toward the edge of the hills. Outside, shadows lengthen and stretch across the village lanes. As evening comes, word about what happened in the synagogue and in Simon's house begins to pass from doorway to doorway, carried on the low murmur of neighbors' conversations. Someone who was there tells another who was not. stories of authority over unclean spirits and power over fever weave together and move outward. Soon, as Luke 4:40 describes, the town responds. People begin to bring their sick to Jesus. Not in the busy glare of midday, but at sunset, when the light softens and lamps are lit. One by one, small groups approach the house. A father supports a daughter whose steps falter. A friend guides another by the arm. A mother carries a child, lifting the small weight close against her chest. Each face carries its own mixture of hope and fear, of fatigue and longing. Outside Simon's door, the gathering slowly grows. The courtyard fills with the quiet shuffle of feet, the whisper of fabric, the soft cough of someone waiting. Lamps glow in many hands and in windows, painting warm circles of yellow on stone and earth. The sky's last color drains into deep blue overhead, and stars begin to appear. Jesus does not stand back at a distance. He steps to each person, laying his hands on them one by one. There is no sense of rush, no impatience. He meets each pair of eyes, each case of pain, as if it were the only one. For those carrying sickness in their bodies, the touch brings relief. Pain easing, trembling quieting, tight muscles loosening, fever cooling. For others carrying burdens of the mind or spirit, his presence reaches into places where words have not been enough. Demons, where they are present, are rebuked and forced to release their hold. They recognize who he is and try to name him, but he silences them. This is not the time for their voices to declare anything. The night belongs instead to quiet restorations, to homes that will be a little lighter in the days to come because of what is happening now under the lamps at Simon's door. All around, the village watches. Some stand back, unsure yet drawn to stay. Others move closer as their turn approaches. The line of those waiting feels less like a crowd and more like a procession of need, each person carrying their own story into the circle of lamplight. You might picture yourself among them, not as someone who must impress or say exactly the right thing, but simply as someone allowed to bring their weariness into a place where it is seen. As the night deepens, the work continues until the stream of people grows thin. The last of the sick are brought and healed. The lamps burn lower, their flames shrinking but still steady. The courtyard, once crowded, slowly empties. People return to their homes walking more easily than when they came. Some lead children who are now laughing softly instead of crying. Others move with shoulders that no longer droop under invisible weights. Inside Simon's house, the atmosphere is different from the afternoon. The air that held the heaviness of fever now holds the sense of food and oil, of bread that has been shared. Simon's mother-in-law, who lay so still earlier, now moves more freely, her face relaxed. The house has become, for one long evening, a lamp of its own on the lake shore. A place where the troubled have come and found gentler space to breathe. Later, when the house quiets and the last visitors have gone, the lake outside lies dark and calm. Small waves lap against the shore in a slow, repeating rhythm. Stars hang over the water, their reflections trembling slightly with each movement. Somewhere nearby, a dog settles into sleep. A child turns over on a mat and releases a long, peaceful sigh. If, as you listen now, your own body carries tension, an ache that has lasted longer than you hoped, a weariness that medicine alone cannot touch, you might let this Capernaum evening sit beside your thoughts. Picture the lamplit courtyard, the kindness in Jesus' gaze. the way he does not turn away from lines of need. Let the image of hands laid gently, one person at a time, remind you that you are not invisible in your weakness. You may not feel an instant change. Your circumstances may remain what they are when morning comes. But as you lie here, you can allow the story's quiet to fold around you like a soft cloak. The fever cooled, the house steadied, the village slowly calming under the stars. With each breath, you can release a little of what you carry, letting your shoulders drop and your jaw unclench until your body, like the lake at night, begins to rest in a slower, more peaceful rhythm. All through the night, the lake had been a dark, shifting sheet of water. The moon rose and fell across its surface, sometimes clear, sometimes hidden behind thin clouds. Waves lapped against the wooden sides of the boats in a steady, familiar rhythm, one that usually meant work was underway. Nets cast and drawn, fish brought in and sorted by lamplight. But on this particular night by the Lake of Gennesaret, the rhythm brought no reward. Simon and his companions had labored for hours, as Luke 5:5 later remembers. Cast the nets, draw them in, shake out nothing but water and the occasional weed, cast again, draw again. Their hands grew rougher, their shoulders heavier, their eyes sore from the strain of watching the dark water for signs of movement. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, they had little to show for their work. The lamps in the boats burned low. The air grew cooler, with the first breath of dawn brushing across the water. One by one, the boats began to turn toward the shore. The shoreline in the early morning carried its own quiet. A few small fires flickered. Birds began to call in the reeds. The houses of Capernaum still held most of their sleepers. But here at the water's edge, the fishermen were awake, tired, and ready to clean their nets. Simon and the others stepped out of the boat and into the shallow water, feeling the wet sand under their feet. They hauled the empty nets to the shore and began the slow, necessary work of washing them, pulling out bits of debris, smoothing twisted lines, preparing for the next time, even though their bodies longed more for rest than for another night like this one. Near them, people were already gathering. News had been spreading about Jesus, about his teaching, and the way his words settled on people's hearts. This morning, the crowd pressed in to hear him. They stood along the shore, their sandals sinking slightly into the damp earth, eager to catch each word as he spoke beside the lake. But as more people arrived, they moved closer and closer until the edge of the crowd almost reached the water. Jesus looked at the boats moored nearby and stepped into the one that belonged to Simon. He asked him to push out a little from shore, and Simon, though tired, agreed. He knew this man now, not only as a teacher, but as one whose presence carried a quiet authority that made saying yes feel natural. The boat drifted a short distance from land. Jesus sat down, the way teachers did. And from that gentle distance, his voice carried clearly over the water to the people on the shore. The lake's surface helped, reflecting sound in soft waves. Simon, sitting nearby with the damp weight of the night still on his clothes and skin, listened too. The words, though Luke does not record them all, would have been full of the kingdom of God. Good news, steady and deep, falling over the crowd like early light. When he finished speaking, the shore grew quieter. Conversations began to rise and then fall again. Jesus turned to Simon. The nets lay there in the boat, recently washed, coiled and ready, but meant more for the coming night than for this hour after dawn. Put out into deep water, Jesus said, and let down the nets for a catch. Simon's first response came from a place anyone who has worked long and seen little result might recognize. "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything," he answered. His voice likely held a touch of weariness, the kind that comes after honest effort that seems to have gone nowhere. The lake, to his experienced eyes, had already decided its answer for that night. Nothing. But then he added, "But because you say so, I will let down the nets." It was a small sentence, but it carried a shift. Not because the conditions look right, not because his strength feels renewed, not because he has calculated a better chance of success. Simply because Jesus has spoken. Simon's hands, still tired, reach for the nets again. The boat moves out further, south, the water deepening beneath it into a calmer, darker blue. They cast the nets. The weighted lines slip beneath the surface, dragging the mesh down into unseen currents. For a moment, there is only the usual pull of water. Then something changes. The nets tug back, not with the loose, empty drag of the night before, but with a surprising heaviness. The lines strain. Simon and his companions brace their feet against the planks of the boat and pull. The nets rise, swollen with movement, fish pressing against one another in a sudden, living weight. The cords begin to stretch to their limits, threatening to tear. Simon quickly signals to their partners in the other boat. The second boat glides over, wood creaking softly. Together they haul the nets, hands gripping, muscles burning in a different way now, not from fruitless effort, but from the abundance straining the mesh. Fish pour into both boats until they are so full that the water curls dangerously near the edges. The night of nothing has suddenly become a morning almost too full. In that moment, Simon is not only looking at the fish, he's looking at Jesus, and at what this overflowing catch says about him. The lake has listened to this man. The deep, which had yielded nothing to their expertise, has responded to his simple command. Simon falls at Jesus' knees there in the crowded boat. "Go away from me, Lord," he says. "I am a sinful man." The words are not dramatic for effect. They are an honest response to standing so close to holiness. The contrast between his own failures and the radiance of what he has just seen feels sharp. Many hearts, when touched suddenly by generosity they did not earn, feel a similar tremble. Who am I to be met like this? But Jesus does not step away. He does not turn his back or rebuke Simon for his confession. Instead, he lifts the weight of fear with a simple phrase: "Don't be afraid." Then he tells him that from now on, he will fish for people. His work will change. His nets will be cast in new waters, and his life will be woven into something larger than he has yet imagined. When they bring the boats to land, the catch is still there, silver bodies shining faintly in the morning light, evidence of what has just happened. Yet Luke tells us that Simon, James, and John leave everything and follow Jesus. The empty night and the overflowing morning have both led them to the same quiet conclusion. This is the one worth trusting with their days and their rest. As the sun climbs higher, the lake grows brighter, busy again with ordinary tasks. Other boats move out. Nets are mended. Children run along the shore. But somewhere along that water line, 3 former fishermen walk beside a teacher whose presence has turned fruitless labor into unexpected provision. Their shoulders, though still strong from years of work, carry a different kind of weight now. Less the pressure to make everything happen themselves, more the lightness of walking in step with someone they are learning to trust. If you have known the ache of long effort that seems to bring little result, projects that fall short, plans that do not unfold as you hoped, days that leave you feeling as though your nets are empty, You might let this scene rest near your thoughts tonight. Picture the quiet lake at dawn, the tired men washing their nets. The simple request to try once more, and the catch that comes not from fresh strength, but from simple obedience. You don't have to solve the depths of your own lake in this moment. It may be enough to remember that there is one who steps into weary boats, who speaks into exhaustion without scolding, and who can bring about a harvest in ways you could not have arranged on your own. As you lie where you are, imagine the boat drifting gently on calm water, the work finished for now, the nets coiled and resting. Feel your own thoughts grow quieter, like the surface of the lake when the wind drops. Let your breath move in slow, easy waves, up and down, until your body begins to accept what your mind is still learning. That you are allowed to stop pulling at empty nets, at least for tonight, and to sink into a deeper, kinder rest. The day had carried its usual weight. Men worked in fields and along the shore. Women drew water, kneaded dough, and watched over children and elders. Tax collectors sat by their booths, counting coin and glancing up at each passerby. Roman soldiers walked the roads with practiced eyes, their presence a reminder of power that did not belong to the people who lived here. By late afternoon, word spread quietly that Jesus was teaching again on a hillside near Capernaum. One voice told another. A woman returning from the well mentioned it to a neighbor. A family finishing their meal chose to walk instead of resting. Slowly, small clusters of people drifted toward the slope, sandals tracing narrow paths through grasses stirred by the wind. The hill was not dramatic, just a steady rise overlooking fields, the lake in the distance, and scattered homes. But it was open and wide, a place where many could sit and see. The light slanted low, laying long shadows over the land. As people arrived, they found spots among rocks and wildflowers, some standing, some settling onto the ground, knees drawn up, arms resting loosely. Jesus came down with his disciples and stood on a level place, as Luke 6:17 describes. The crowd around him was a weave of different stories. Fishermen with hands rough from rope and wood, mothers with babies resting against their shoulders, older men whose steps were careful, younger ones whose faces held both hope and caution. Some had walked a long distance. Some carried illnesses or private griefs. Some were simply tired from being alive under the weight of demands, debts, and expectations. He lifted his eyes toward his disciples and began to speak. His voice did not need to strain. The hillside carried sound gently, letting it fall across the people like soft rain. "Blessed are you who are poor," he said, "for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh." The words moved through the crowd, surprising in their direction. In most stories, it was the rich, the full, the laughing who seemed closest to blessing. But Jesus' gaze rested on faces that knew the feel of empty hands and empty tables, of tears cried quietly in corners where no one else looked. Many listening knew what it meant for coin to stretch thin and for work to lag behind what was needed. Some had felt their stomachs growl earlier that day. Others had hidden their tears because they did not want to trouble anyone. To hear "Blessed are you" addressed to them, not only as a distant promise, but as a present reality seen by God, was like feeling a hand rest gently on a tired shoulder. "Blessed are you when people hate you," he continued, "when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man." Some knew that sting too. The sideways glances, the distances kept, the words spoken behind closed doors. Following him would not always mean smoother roads. Yet he said that on such days they could rejoice, for their reward in heaven would be great. Their suffering would not be forgotten or wasted. At the same time, he spoke words that turned usual expectations further. "But woe to you who are rich," he said, "for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep." It was not that food or laughter themselves were wrong. It was that a life anchored only in full plates and easy joy, one that never noticed those who lacked both, was missing something deep. The true measure of blessing did not lie in how much a person could hold in their hands, but in how closely they walked with the heart of God. On the hillside, the wind moved gently through the grass. A child shifted in a mother's lap, and settled again. An older man, who had spent many nights wondering if God remembered his small house at the edge of the village, felt those words about the poor and the hungry settle somewhere inside his chest like a small, steady light. You might imagine yourself sitting among them, knees bent, hands resting loosely on your shins. Perhaps you feel poor in ways numbers do not show. Poor in energy, poor in hope, poor in a sense of being understood. Perhaps your hunger is not only for bread, but for peace in your thoughts, for gentleness in your days. Perhaps your tears have fallen alone, without anyone else seeing them. Into all of that, Jesus speaks blessing. Not a blessing that pretends hardship isn't real, but one that looks at it and promises that it is not the final word. The kingdom of God belongs in a special way to those who know they lack, who feel their need, who cannot pretend to be self-sufficient. Sorrow, he says, will not remain sorrow forever. Hunger will not remain hunger forever. The story is still moving. As the teaching continues into other words about love, mercy, and forgiveness, the people listen, some with eyes closed, letting the sound wash over them. The sun dips lower, painting the clouds in softer colors. The lake in the distance reflects a thin strip of fading gold. When the gathering begins to thin, people rise slowly. Some talk quietly as they walk back down the slope, repeating phrases that touched them. Others are silent, carrying the words in their hearts like freshly baked bread wrapped in cloth, still warm. The path home is the same path they walked earlier, but their steps feel a little different. No less real, no less dusty, yet threaded through with a new kind of hope. Night comes. Lamps are lit in small homes along the lanes. In one house, a woman who listened from the edge of the crowd lies down beside her children and whispers Jesus' blessing over them in her own words. In another, an older man sits by a low table, staring at the simple meal before him with unexpected gratitude, remembering that the hungry are seen and will be filled. If your heart feels worn this evening, if you are tired of carrying the same worries, the same unanswered questions, you might let those hillside blessings rest near you. Here, blessed are you, spoken, not to some distant group, but close to your own experience, to your poverty of strength, to your quiet tears, to the places that ache from being misunderstood or set aside. You do not need to force yourself into cheerfulness. You do not need to pretend that everything is fine. Instead, you can allow yourself to be among the ones Jesus calls blessed in their very need. Let his words be like a soft blanket over your tired thoughts, a gentle weight that helps them settle. As you breathe in and out, imagine the hillside under a darkening sky, the crowd gone, the grass still faintly pressed where they once sat. The wind moves in slow waves across the slope, and far below, The lake lies calm. In that quiet, blessing still lingers in the air. Let your own breathing fall into that rhythm, long and unhurried, until your body grows heavier against the bed and your mind can ease into rest. Evening settles over the town, like a shawl laid gently across its shoulders. The streets grow quieter as people finish their meals, bank their fires, and begin to draw their households into the circle of lamplight. Somewhere in that softening dusk, a large house stands with its courtyard prepared. Cushions arranged, low tables set, lamps trimmed and burning steadily against the coming night. This is the home of a Pharisee named Simon, as Luke 7:36-50 remembers. He has invited Jesus to eat with him. Guests arrive in ones and twos, greeted at the doorway and led inside. Servants move back and forth, bringing water for dusty feet, arranging dishes of figs and olives, setting out bread still warm from the oven. The smell of roasted food and spiced wine hangs in the air, mixing with the faint scent of oil and smoke from the lamps. Jesus reclines at the table among the others, leaning on one arm, as was the custom, his feet stretched out behind him. The conversation begins in low tones. Questions, observations, the usual careful exchanges between men who watch one another's responses with interest. The night has the feel of something measured and controlled, every place at the table chosen, every course of the meal thought through. Yet outside, in the darker streets beyond the courtyard wall, another story is moving toward this house. A woman walks alone, her steps quiet on the stone. The town knows her, though not kindly. Her reputation has settled on her shoulders like a heavy, ill-fitting garment that she cannot remove. Faces turn away when she passes. Voices drop low when they speak her name. She has heard about Jesus, about the way he speaks, the way he looks at people as though he truly sees them, the way those who carry guilt and sorrow do not seem to leave him heavier, but lighter. Something in her aches toward that kind of gaze, that kind of presence. In her hands, she carries an alabaster jar of perfume. It is costly, the sort of thing people tend to guard for special moments. Tonight, she has chosen what that moment will be. Her heart beats hard beneath her ribs as she nears the Pharisee's house. Respectable gatherings like this are not places she is expected or wanted to enter. But the pull toward the one inside is stronger than the wall of disapproval she can feel even before she reaches the door. She steps through the entrance and into the courtyard. Conversations falter, eyes turn, some narrow. The line of her shoulders is straight, but inside she feels every look, every silent judgment. She does not speak to explain herself. Instead, she moves toward Jesus, drawn like someone moving from cold shadow toward the only warm fire in a room. He is reclining at the table, his feet behind him. She stands there for a moment, close enough to see the dust that still clings to his skin from the day's roads, close enough to catch the calm in his face, even as the atmosphere around them tightens. Tears rise before she can hold them back. They are not the sharp, choking tears of anger, but the deep, quiet kind that come when a long-held burden finally finds a place to lay down. They fall onto his feet, darkening the dust in small, shining streaks. She kneels. With no towel at hand, she does something that startles everyone watching, perhaps even herself. She reaches up, loosens her hair, and lets it fall forward. Then, with that hair, she gently wipes his feet, the way one might carefully dry a child after a bath. The gesture is intimate, humble, utterly unguarded. Opening the alabaster jar, she pours perfume on his feet. The fragrance rises at once, filling the courtyard. threading through the smell of roasted food and lamp smoke until it becomes the dominant note in the room. It seeps into the woven fibers of cushions, into the folds of garments, into the very air they breathe. No one can pretend not to notice what she has done. Simon the Pharisee watches, and his thoughts turn privately over what he is seeing. If this man were truly a prophet, he reasons, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is. In Simon's mind, her presence and her touch should have disqualified her. Instead, Jesus allows her nearness as if it were welcome. The disconnect disturbs him. Jesus, knowing Simon's thoughts, turns toward him with the calm of someone who is not threatened by the questions others carry. "Simon, I have something to tell you," he says. Simon answers, "Tell me, teacher." Jesus speaks of two people who owed money to a lender, one a larger amount, the other smaller. Neither had the means to pay. The lender canceled both debts. "Now which of them will love him more?" Jesus asks. Simon considers and replies, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." "You have judged correctly," Jesus says. Then he turns toward the woman, though he continues to speak to Simon. He draws a quiet contrast between the expected courtesies of hospitality and this woman's actions. When he entered Simon's house, no water was given for his feet, yet she has washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. No kiss of greeting was offered, yet she has not stopped kissing his feet. No oil was poured on his head, yet she has poured costly perfume on his feet. Her many sins, he says, have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. The one who has been forgiven little loves little. Those at the table shift uneasily. The categories they have used to arrange their social world, pious and impure, honored and avoided, seem to blur around the edges in the presence of this teacher. Yet Jesus does not argue with them. Instead, he turns his full attention to the woman. For the first time, he speaks directly to her. "Your sins are forgiven," he says. The other guests begin to whisper among themselves. Who is this who even forgives sins? Their question circles the table, soft but sharp. The woman hears them. But Jesus' voice cuts through the murmur like a clear note through background noise. "Your faith has saved you," he tells her. "Go in peace." Go in peace. Those words fall over her like a cloak far lighter than the one she has worn for so long. Her reputation is not erased from the minds of everyone in the town, not in a moment. But something more important has shifted. The one whose judgment truly matters has named her forgiven, has honored her love, has released her from the debt she could never have paid alone. She rises slowly. The scent of the perfume still hangs in the air, a reminder of what has just taken place. Her tears have dried on his feet. Her hair, slightly damp and carrying some of the fragrance, brushes her shoulders as she turns to leave. The courtyard seems different now, not because the walls or the lamps have changed, but because the weight on her chest has lifted. Outside, the street is cooler than the courtyard, the night air brushing against her face like a quiet blessing. The town is settling deeper into darkness. Windows glow here and there. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and then is silent. She walks through familiar lanes with an unfamiliar lightness in her step. If you have known the ache of shame, the feeling of being looked at and silently measured, of carrying old choices like heavy stones, you might find yourself near this woman in your thoughts. You may not have poured perfume or washed anyone's feet, but you know what it is to long for a voice that does not condemn, a gaze that does not turn away. Hear again the words spoken over her. Your sins are forgiven. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. They are not hurried. not grudging. They are steady and sure, like a hand resting on the center of the chest, calming a heart that has been racing for too long. As you lie where you are now, you do not need to replay every mistake or try to argue yourself into worthiness. You can picture instead that quiet courtyard, the sheen of perfume on worn feet, the way the night air outside felt different when she stepped into it forgiven. Let that image sit beside you. Let the thought of mercy, given freely, not earned, loosen the tight places inside. With each slow breath, imagine setting down one more stone you have been carrying. Not because you deserve it by your own strength, but because there is one who delights to lift what you cannot. Let your shoulders ease back into the pillow. Your hands go soft. Your thoughts grow gentler. Like the fragrance that lingers long after the jar is empty, may the sense of being seen and accepted linger over you until your mind grows quiet and you drift into a deep, untroubled sleep. All day the lake had glittered under the sun, a wide, shifting mirror between the hills. Boats came and went from the shore, their sails bellied by the breeze, their hulls carrying fish, nets, and the quiet talk of those who knew these waters well. As the afternoon faded, the light grew warmer, drawing long bands of gold across the surface. Near one stretch of shoreline, Jesus and his disciples finished speaking with the crowds. Feet were dusty, voices a little worn from the day. The air held that particular softness that comes when heat begins to lose its grip and evening is not far off. "Let's go over to the other side of the lake," Jesus said, as Luke 8:22 remembers. They moved toward one of the boats, a sturdy craft, familiar to several of them from years of work. The wood creaked in its usual, reassuring way as they stepped aboard. The smell of rope, tar, and old fish lingered. Calmer now that the day's heavy labor was behind them. Some disciples loosed the moorings, others settled at oars or checked the small sail. The boat slid away from the shore, cutting a gentle path through the water. The town behind them grew smaller, its sounds thinning until only fragments of laughter or a dog's distant bark reached them. Ahead lay the open lake, dimming from bright blue to the deeper tones of approaching dusk. Jesus found a place near the stern, where a cushion had been left, perhaps from earlier work, perhaps kept for moments just like this. He lay down, his head resting against it, his body yielding to the familiar side-to-side sway of the boat. The rhythm of the waves, the murmur of his friends' voices, and the fading warmth of the day wrapped around him like a blanket. Soon he slept. The others continued their work. Some watched the shoreline recede, lights beginning to appear in small clusters where villages hugged the water. Others looked outward, gauging the clouds, reading the subtle shifts in wind and air that they had learned to notice over years on this lake. For a while everything seemed as it should be. The oars dipped and rose in quiet strokes. The sail tugged gently. But on this lake, storms could come quickly. The hills around it, steep in places, sometimes funneled cold air down without much warning. As evening pressed in, the breeze that had been steady began to sharpen. Ripples on the surface grew longer, more insistent. The boat rocked more deeply. Clouds thickened, their darker edges sliding over the fading light. The first stronger gust hit the sail, making it snap and strain. Water slapped harder against the wooden sides, then began to spill over in sprays that dampened cloaks and hair. The disciples moved fast, adjusting the sail, bracing themselves, calling short instructions to one another. They had done this before. Many were fishermen. They knew what it was to be caught in bad weather, to ride it out with skill and a kind of practiced courage. Yet tonight, something about the wind felt more sudden, the waves heavier, the darkness nearer. The boat rose high on a swell and dropped hard into a trough. A wave broke over the bow, sending a cold sheet of water across the boards. Someone grabbed a bucket and began to bail, flinging water back over the side as quickly as he could. Another tightened grip on a rope, knuckles pale. Conversation shrank to urgent phrases, calls of warning, bursts of breath as they fought to keep the small vessel steady. Jesus was still sleeping. The storm did not jolt him awake, not at first. His body, tired from days of walking and teaching, stayed at rest even as the boat pitched and the wind howled around them. There was something almost startling in the sight. A man asleep, head on a cushion, while the world seemed to tilt and roar. Fear, when it comes, rarely asks permission. It crept up from the water onto the planks and into their chests. These were not delicate men. They knew danger and had lived through it. But as the waves slapped harder and the sky pressed low, a thought began to press just behind their ribs. What if this time our strength isn't enough? They went to him, hands wet, faces streaked with spray. They leaned over the one who lay so calmly in their wildly moving boat. "Master, Master, we're going to drown," they cried, as Luke 8:24 records. Their words carried every ounce of their alarm, every memory of storms that had nearly taken other boats down. Jesus woke. He did not rise in a panic. He stood in that rocking vessel with the steadiness of someone whose center is not moved by wind. The water slapped the sides, cold and insistent. The sail pulled and snapped. The sky flickered with distant light. He rebuked the wind and the raging waters. Perhaps his voice was not especially loud, but it carried a weight deeper than noise. The lake, which moments ago had seemed eager to swallow them, began to fall back into stillness. The waves lost their sharp edges, slumping into gentler swells. The wind, which had clawed at the sail and the men's cloaks, eased into a softer breath. In a few moments, the water lay almost smooth again, the boat rocking in a calmer, slower rhythm. The storm had not faded in a long, gradual decline. It had been told to stop, and it stopped. Silence followed, the kind that feels almost as loud as the noise that came before it. The men looked at one another, then at Jesus, then out at the suddenly obedient lake. Their hearts still pounded from the shock of what had just happened, pulses slow to catch up with the calm their eyes now saw. "Where is your faith?" Jesus asked them. The question did not scold them for waking him. It invited them to consider where their trust had rested while the wind howled. Only in their own skill, only in what they could see, or in the one who had chosen to share their boat in the first place. They were, Luke says, filled with fear and amazement. "Who is this?" they asked one another. "He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." The rest of the crossing unfolded quietly. The boat moved toward the far shore under a sky that slowly cleared. The clouds thinned, revealing scattered stars. The air cooled and smelled clean, washed by the rain that had fallen. The lake, which had been a place of terror moments earlier, returned to its familiar role as a road of water between coasts. Some of the disciples sat in silence, letting their breathing slow. Others kept their hands loosely on the ropes and oars, more out of habit than necessity. Every so often, one would glance back at Jesus, no longer sleeping, but no more troubled by what had happened than if a child had been startled from a nap by a sudden noise and then soothed again. If your thoughts have felt stormy lately, if worries rise quickly and crash against one another, If your mind keeps circling the same fears until they feel as relentless as waves, it might help to keep this small boat in view. See it there on the dark water, tossed and strained, then calmed by a presence that is not shaken by what shakes everyone else. You are not on the same lake. Your storm may have nothing to do with wind or water. It may be about work or family or health or questions of who you are and where you are going. Each time your heart surges, you might feel as though you are bailing as fast as you can and still taking on water. Tonight, you do not have to pretend the waves are not real. But you might picture Jesus resting in the back of your own small boat, not because he does not care, but because he is not threatened. Imagine bringing your fear to him as honestly as those disciples did. Not polished, not softened, just spoken as it is. Then imagine the slow quiet that follows. Thoughts losing some of their sharp edges, breath gentling, the surface of your inner world smoothing out like water after a strong wind has passed. As you lie where you are now, feel the mattress under you as something solid, like the wooden boards beneath the disciples' feet. Listen for the waves in your mind beginning to space themselves farther apart. With each long, unhurried breath, you can lean a little more of your weight onto the one who does not lose his footing when wind rises. In time, like that boat gliding toward the far shore under a clearing sky, your body can accept what your heart is just beginning to trust. That even when the storm is loud, you are not alone in it. And there is a calm deeper than the wind that waits to hold you as you drift toward sleep. The sun was already beginning its slow descent when the boat slid toward a quieter stretch of shore. After days of movement, towns, crowds, questions, needs, Jesus had led his disciples toward a more solitary place near Bethsaida, as Luke 9:10 tells us. They were weary in the honest way that comes from pouring themselves out, their bodies and minds both ready for rest. The land rose gently from the water, a wide slope of grass dotted with small wildflowers and stones warmed by the day. Here, the sounds of the city faded. The lake's voice was softer, a simple hush of waves against the shore, the occasional call of a bird overhead. It was the kind of place where one might breathe a little more deeply and speak a little more slowly. Jesus and the disciples stepped onto the land, their sandals pressing faint prints into the damp edge of the shore. They walked up the slope, finding level ground where the view reached far, across the lake, across the fields, toward the distant line of hills. The air smelled of grass and earth, of water and faint traces of the day's heat leaving the stones. But rest, for now, would have to make room for something else. The crowd had followed. Word of where Jesus had gone slipped quickly through nearby towns, from one person to another. Some walked with staff in hand, some with children balanced on hips, some leaning on the arm of a friend. Their feet found the same paths, their hearts drawn by the hope that the one who had healed, taught, and welcomed before would not turn them away now. Soon, the hillside that had felt empty began to fill. People settled wherever they could, some in clusters, some at a slight distance from others, each one carrying their own needs, questions, and quiet aches. The disciples, who had hoped for a retreat, saw the crowd gathering and felt the tug between their own tiredness and the compassion their teachers so often showed. Jesus welcomed them. He did not send them away. He spoke to them about the kingdom of God, about a reality deeper than the hunger and uncertainty that shadowed their days. He healed those in need of healing, moving among them with a calm that did not hurry, even as the sun continued its slow arc. Time passed. Shadows lengthened on the grass. The light shifted from bright to softer gold. The disciples felt their own hunger and saw the same quiet necessity in the faces of those sitting on the slope. This was not a crowded marketplace where food could easily be bought. It was a remote place, and the day was nearly over. They came to Jesus with a practical concern. "Send the crowd away," they said, "so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging." It was a sensible suggestion, born of care. They did not want these people to be stranded in the dark with empty stomachs and nowhere to sleep. Jesus answered in a way they did not expect. "You give them something to eat." They looked at him, then at the crowd, then at one another. There were about 5,000 men there, Luke notes, not counting women and children. The thought of feeding all of them with their own resources was almost absurd. They said they had only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, barely enough for a small household, much less this sea of faces. Jesus did not argue or dismiss their sense of limitation. Instead, he gave simple instructions. Have the people sit down in groups of about 50 each. The disciples moved through the crowd, inviting people to sit. Groups formed across the hillside, a patchwork of small circles, some made up of families, others of strangers who had become neighbors for this one evening. People lowered themselves to the grass, adjusting cloaks beneath them, tucking their feet to one side, settling children in their laps. The murmur of voices softened into something quieter, an expectant hum beneath the open sky. Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He looked up to heaven and gave thanks. His hands, accustomed to breaking bread in small homes and by simple tables, now broke it for a gathering large enough to fill the slope. He handed pieces to the disciples, and they in turn carried them to the groups. At first, a person might have expected the bread to run out quickly. 1 circle fed, perhaps 2, and then empty hands. But as the disciples moved from group to group, the loaves did not diminish in the way they knew food usually did. There was always more to pass, more to lay in open palms, more to share. Pieces of fish accompanied the bread, simple and sustaining. Across the hillside, hands received what was offered. Bread was chewed slowly, its familiar taste grounding people in the goodness of the moment. The fish satisfied in a way that went beyond the first sharp edge of hunger. Children, who may have begun to grow restless as the day wore on, quieted around their bites. Older ones ate with the grateful steadiness of those who have known what it is to face long stretches of scarcity. No one went without. As Luke 9:17 says, they all ate and were satisfied. The need that had begun to gnaw at their insides faded into a comfortable fullness. Conversations resumed in softer tones as people finished their portions. The fear of the long walk back on an empty stomach loosened its hold. When the eating was done, Jesus did not leave the hillside scattered with scraps. He asked the disciples to gather the leftovers. They moved among the groups again, collecting broken pieces into baskets. When they counted, there were 12 baskets of fragments, more remaining than they had begun with. What started as only had become more than enough, with abundance to spare. The light continued to fade. The sky shifted toward rose and then deeper blue. Far below, the lake reflected the last color of the day, then slowly faded into a darker mirror. The crowd began to disperse, people rising from their groups, brushing bits of grass from their clothes, lifting sleepy children into their arms. They walked away from the hillside not only carrying full stomachs, but a story, one in which their hunger had been met in a place where no one expected a meal. The disciples, for their part, carried their own quiet wonder. Their hands had broken the loaves, had passed pieces from person to person, had filled baskets with leftovers. Their minds, practical and earthbound, had seen the original smallness of the 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now, they had to carry the memory of what those same loaves had become. If your day has ended with a sense of only this much strength, only this much time, only this much hope, you might rest for a moment on this hillside. See the groups seated on the grass, dusk gathering around them. Feel the slight coolness in the air as the heat drains away. Notice the simple movement of bread from hand to hand, the fish shared without hurry, the way hunger eases into contentment. You may not know how your own little could become enough. You may be keenly aware of what you lack. Tonight, rather than trying to multiply your resources in your mind, you can simply remember that there is one who lifts what seems too small, blesses it, and uses it in ways that reach farther than your calculations. As you lie where you are, imagine the hillside now emptied of the crowd. The grass still bears the faint impressions where they sat. The lake below lies quiet, holding a thin line of reflected starlight. Somewhere nearby, a few remaining embers glow in the cool air. Let your breathing fall in with that gentle scene. Slow, steady, unhurried. In that calm, you can allow today's worries about not enough to grow softer at the edges. Like the disciples at the end of the evening, you do not have to understand every detail of how provision came. It may be enough, just for this night, to know that you are seen in your hunger, and that there is a kindness at work deeper than your shortage. Let that thought rest beside you until your eyes grow heavy and sleep comes quietly, like evening settling over the fields. The road from Jerusalem down to Jericho wound through hills that grew steadily harsher as it descended. Stones jutted from the earth. Dust clung to sandals and hems. In some stretches, the path squeezed between rocky outcrops that cast shadows even in the bright hours of the day. Travelers knew this route could be dangerous. Stories of thieves hiding among the rocks passed from mouth to mouth like warnings carried on the wind. On one such day, a man walked that road alone. His cloak hung in the ordinary way of someone going about expected business. Perhaps he had just left the city after offering prayers or paying dues. Perhaps his mind was on home, on the faces waiting for him, on the tasks he would return to in Jericho or some village nearby. The rhythm of his steps matched the rhythm of his thoughts. Steady, preoccupied, a bit tired. Then danger, the kind that arrives without warning. Luke 10:30 tells it plainly. He fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. The world that had seemed solid under his feet moments before narrowed to a sharp rush of pain and then to a blur. Blow after blow, then dust, then the sound of retreating footsteps. Finally, only the rough scrape of his own breathing remained. He lay there on the road's edge, between Jerusalem and Jericho, between consciousness and the dark. The sun moved slowly overhead. Flies hovered. Dust settled onto skin already marked with bruises. The path did not stop being a path just because his life had been cracked open upon it. It remained what it had always been, a way others would still walk. After some time, footsteps approached. A priest was coming down the same road, someone who knew the rhythms of temple courts, who had moved among sacred things, who understood the words of prayers and offerings. He saw the man lying there. For a brief moment, the lines of the scene crossed, one in need, one with status and knowledge. The priest passed by on the other side. Perhaps he feared ritual impurity. Perhaps he told himself there was nothing more he could do. Perhaps he did not know where to begin. Whatever his reasons, his steps stayed on the safer edge of the path. The wounded man's breathing did not draw him closer. The road swallowed each footfall until he vanished around a bend. Later, another figure approached, a Levite, someone also familiar with the things of God, with songs and service. He too saw the man lying there. He too went by on the far side of the road. The distance between them stayed unbroken. The wounded man remained a problem unsolved, a risk unaccepted, a need untouched. The sun moved again. Shadows lengthened. Insects hummed. The man on the ground drifted in and out of awareness, his body heavy, his skin stinging where cloth no longer covered it. The road, which had once seemed like a simple passage from one place to another, had become for him a narrow world of pain and waiting. Then another traveler came. He was a Samaritan, someone the wounded man's own people would not have expected kindness from. Tension ran deep between Jews and Samaritans, differences in worship, history, and identity that had hardened into walls. Yet when this Samaritan saw the man, something in him moved. Luke says he took pity on him. The feeling did not stay as an idea, it flowed down into his actions. He came near, stepping off whatever safe line he might have chosen, and let the reality of the injured man's condition reach his senses. The smell of sweat and blood, the broken rhythm of breathing, the dirt clinging to torn skin. He bent down. Gently, he began to tend the wounds, pouring on oil to soothe and wine to cleanse. His hands, which might have been used that day only to hold reins or carry provisions, became instruments of care. He tore strips of cloth to bind the injuries, slowing the bleeding, covering the exposed places. Then he lifted the man. The weight was awkward, the movement slow, but he did not turn away. He set him on his own animal, taking the place of the one who walked so the wounded could ride. Step by step, he led the animal along the road until they reached an inn, a simple building where travelers could find shelter, food, and a bit of safety when the day's light faded. Inside, the air felt different from the exposed road. There were walls, a roof, the faint smells of cooking and lamp oil, the murmur of other guests. The Samaritan brought the man in and continued to care for him there, staying through the night. Perhaps he changed bandages, offered sips of water, made sure the blanket covered him when he shivered. The day that had begun as his own journey had become, without warning, a long watch over someone else's healing. In the morning, he took out 2 denarii, enough for several days' lodging, and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." His care extended beyond his own presence, carried forward by his promise and his willingness to cover the cost. When Jesus finished telling this story, he asked which of the 3, priest, Levite, Samaritan, had been a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers. The answer was clear, even to the expert in the law who had been testing him, the one who had mercy on him. "Go and do likewise," Jesus said. On that dusty road between cities, neighborliness was not defined by shared background, status, or convenience. It was defined by the willingness to draw near to suffering, to let another's pain interrupt one's own plans, to turn pity into practical help. If you listen to this story tonight with an anxious heart, you might find yourself somewhere along that path. Perhaps you feel like the man lying by the roadside, hurt in ways others have walked past, your struggles half visible, half hidden. You may have watched people who seemed most likely to help drift by at a distance, their reasons unknown to you. Hear, then, that in Jesus' telling, it is mercy that truly reveals who is close. The Samaritan, the unexpected one, becomes the image of a heart that stops, stoops, and stays. And beneath that image lies something deeper still: the way God draws near to you. When others have passed by, when a day has stripped you of strength or dignity or hope, there is one who does not stay on the far side of the road. You might also recognize yourself in the Samaritan, weary from your own journey, yet still drawn again and again to care for those around you. Perhaps you have been the one to stop at bedsides, to listen to late-night calls, to carry others when your own energy felt thin. The story honors that kind of mercy, not with loud applause, but with a simple naming. This is what it looks like to be a neighbor. As night deepens around you now, you can imagine that Jericho road under the stars. The heat of the day has bled away into cooler air. The stones that seemed harsh in the sun lie quiet and still. Somewhere an inn stands with a small lamp glowing in its doorway, a sign that inside someone is being tended and watched over. Let that picture stay with you as you breathe more slowly. If you feel like the one wounded, allow yourself to rest in the thought that you are not abandoned. There is care beyond what you can see. If you feel like the one who has been caring for others, let the inn's sheltered room remind you that even helpers are allowed to sleep. With each gentle breath, imagine the road growing softer at the edges, the night air wrapping around you like a simple blanket, the sense of danger fading into distance. The journey will continue in the morning. For now, you are permitted to lay down, like the traveler in the inn, and let your body sink into safety, trusting that mercy keeps watch as you drift into the quiet of sleep. The day had begun like any other, with the quiet urgency that comes when the sun rises over fields and markets and households that always seem to need a little more than they have. In the small villages scattered around Galilee, doors opened to let in the cool of morning. Clay ovens warmed for bread. Tools were lifted from their hooks. Children were sent toward wells with jars held in both hands. Somewhere among these villages, a man named Eliab tightened the leather cord of his belt and stepped out of his house, his mind already running ahead of his feet. The last harvest had been thin. A late storm had flattened some of his barley. The tax collectors would still come. His grain jars were not empty, but when he looked at them, he saw not what was there, but how quickly it might be gone. His wife folded worn garments by the door, turning them in her hands as she thought about the coming months. 2 daughters would soon need dowries. Sandals wore out. Roofs leaked. Prices in the market shifted in ways they could not control. She pressed her fingers against the coarse cloth and wondered if she could patch it one more time. When Eliab heard that Jesus was teaching again, he went, not because he had extra time, but because worry had become a weight he could not set down by himself. Others joined him on the road. A woman who sold figs in the market, a shepherd with sunburned arms, a widow whose oil jar seemed to empty faster than she could refill it. They walked toward a place where Jesus often spoke. A rise of land with a clear view of open sky. The hillside was already speckled with people when they arrived. Some sat cross-legged on the ground, others leaned against stones. The grass brushed their ankles, dotted with small wildflowers that lifted their faces to the light without any thought for tomorrow. Above, ravens wheeled in slow circles, their dark wings catching the currents of air with an ease that seemed almost careless. Jesus looked at his disciples, but his words fell gently over everyone within hearing. Luke 12:22 says he began this way: "Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. The sentence met hearts already crowded with what-ifs. Don't worry. It sounded almost too simple, yet his tone was not scolding. It was like someone taking a heavy bundle from another's back, not by pretending it was light, but by shouldering it themselves. Life is more than food, he said, and the body more than clothes. He pointed upward. Consider the ravens, he told them. The birds glided and dipped above their heads, black shapes against the pale blue. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn. Yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Eliab watched the ravens. He knew they never planted a single seed, never sweated under the sun, never counted sacks of grain. Yet they did not starve. The thought did not erase his concern for his fields, but it slipped a quiet question into the middle of his worry. If God sees them, how could he be blind to me? Who of you, by worrying, Jesus asked, can add a single hour to your life? The people shifted on the grass. The question hung in the air like a soft bell. Worry had cost them sleep, energy, patience. It had never added length to their days. Since you cannot do this very little thing, he went on, why do you worry about the rest? He turned their eyes to the ground. Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. The hillside itself became his illustration. Lilies and other small blossoms stood in their simple beauty, each petal a quiet work of art laid out under open sky. No loom had produced their colors. No frantic hand had woven their patterns. The wind moved through them, and they leaned and righted themselves without strain. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, Jesus said, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? You of little faith. The words were not a slap, but a gentle naming of what they already knew about themselves. Their trust fluttered and fell, like a small bird startled too easily. Yet even as he named their smallness, he spoke of God's largeness, of care extended to things as temporary as grass. And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink, he said. Do not worry about it, for the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. Your Father knows, not a distant ruler, not an indifferent sky, a Father. Eliab felt the words settle somewhere behind his ribs. The same one who painted the lilies and fed the ravens already knew the exact weight of the hunger he feared, the costs he counted, the nights he lay awake and stared at the dark beams overhead. But seek his kingdom, Jesus said, and these things will be given to you as well. There was silence then, broken only by the soft slide of wind through the grass, the faint rustle of clothing as people shifted their weight. The kingdom he spoke of was not made of coins or stored grain. It was made of trust, mercy, justice, and a nearness to God that did not depend on how much someone could hold in their hands. And then this, in Luke 12:32, do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Little flock. The phrase wrapped around them with a tenderness they were not used to hearing from leaders or landlords. They were not forgotten workers at the bottom of some great, uncaring system. They were sheep watched by a shepherd who counted them, who knew when one was missing, who took joy in giving them good pasture. Jesus spoke also of treasure, of purses that do not wear out, of a treasure in heaven that does not fail. where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, he said, there your heart will be also. For Eliab and for many listening, this did not mean their daily concerns vanished. Fields still needed tending. Children still needed food and clothing. But a subtle shift began. Their hearts, which had been tethered tightly to jars, purses, and storerooms, felt a new cord tying them to something steadier. The care of a father who saw ravens and lilies and anxious villagers with the same attentive gaze. As the teaching ended and people rose to go, the hillside breathed out. Footsteps found paths back toward villages. The wildflowers stayed where they were, unconcerned about who had come and gone. The ravens continued their circling, their calls cutting through the air in rough, familiar sounds. Eliab walked home with the same calloused hands, the same fields waiting, the same responsibilities. But his thoughts moved a little differently. Each time worry surged, about taxes, about dowries, about weather he could not control. Another picture rose to meet it. Black wings gliding without panic, small flowers dressed in a beauty they had not worked to earn. A shepherd's voice saying, "Do not be afraid, little flock." Tonight, as you lie where you are, perhaps your mind has its own list of worries. Bills, deadlines, relationships, health, questions about the future that do not have clear answers. Your heart may feel like a clenched fist, tight around needs you are not sure will be met. For this moment, you are not being asked to deny any of that. Only to consider, as Jesus invited his listeners. To picture birds carried by air they did not create, flowers clothed by a hand they cannot see, and a gentle voice calling you part of a small, beloved flock. Soma. Let your breathing follow the rhythm of that hillside, slow like the drifting of ravens, soft like wind through grass. When worry rises, you do not have to wrestle it to the ground. You can notice it, and then quietly turn your attention back to the one who already knows what you need. Feel the weight of your body resting where you are, supported without your effort, the way the flowers are held by the soil and the birds by the air. With each exhale, you can loosen your grip just a little. On tomorrow's meals, on tomorrow's clothing, on the many things beyond your reach. Trusting that, for tonight, it is enough to be seen, to be known, and to be gently watched over as sleep draws near. The Sabbath morning in that small village began the way many Sabbath mornings had begun before. The air was cooler than it would be by midday. Light slipped in thin bands through narrow streets, touching doorways and small courtyards where families finished their preparations and turned their steps toward the synagogue. Sandals scuffed softly on the packed earth. A father took a child's hand. An older woman, wrapped in a shawl faded by years of sun, moved more slowly, each step careful, measured. People greeted one another in low voices, the kind that fit the quiet of the day. Nods, brief smiles, the simple comfort of being together. Inside the synagogue, the space was familiar. Stone walls had heard years of prayers. Benches and mats had held the same families through seasons of planting and harvest, feast and fast. Lamps burned steadily, casting warm circles of light on scrolls, on faces, on the dust that lingered in the air. Among those who entered that day, as Luke 13:10-17 tells us, was a woman who had been bent over for 18 years. Her back curved forward, her shoulders pulled down, her gaze fixed mostly on the ground a few steps ahead of her. She could not straighten up at all. She moved through the doorway, not with the ease of someone who expects to be noticed, but with the practiced quiet of someone who has grown used to being lower than other people's eyes. She saw the floor, the worn edges of mats, the hems of garments. She knew voices, not always faces. The world above her, the heights of doorways, the sweep of sky, the expressions that passed across strangers' brows, had been out of reach for so long that she could only remember it in pieces. People shifted to make room. Some looked at her with a kind of sad familiarity, as one might look at a tree long grown crooked on the edge of a field, always there, always the same. Others barely glanced her way, their attention already turning toward the front where the teacher would stand. Jesus was teaching in the synagogue that day. His presence did not come with trumpets or proclamations, only with a calm, steady authority that had begun to draw many hearts. His words moved through the room, touching the stories and questions people carried with them. Yet as he spoke, his eyes did not rest only on the upright and the comfortable. They moved across the gathered ones, seeing the weary places they carried in their bodies and in their spirits. He saw her. He called her forward. For a moment, the room held its breath. Those nearest her turned, surprised. She had grown used to finding a spot along the side, in the back, in corners where she would not be in the way. Now the teacher's voice, gentle yet sure, invited her into the open center of the room. Her heart beat faster. To move forward meant crossing a space where everyone could see her crooked back, her slow, uneven steps. Yet she went, because there was something in his tone that sounded less like command and more like welcome. The path between her and Jesus felt longer than it was. Still, she made her way, counting each step, until she stood before him as best she could, her body still bent, her eyes still drawn toward the ground. "Woman," he said, "you are set free from your infirmity." The words fell over her like something warm, like sunlight on a day when she had expected only shadow. Before she had time to fully understand them, he placed his hands on her. His touch was not heavy, not rough. It did not press her down further. It rested on her like a blessing spoken through skin. Immediately, she straightened up. The change, when it came, was not a long, gradual unfolding. It was sudden. Years of curvature releasing in a moment, as though an invisible weight had been lifted from her spine. Shoulder by shoulder, vertebra by vertebra, her body rose. For the first time in 18 years, she stood upright. The room shifted around her. She saw faces at their true height, not only chins and robes. She saw the lines of stone along the synagogue walls, the full height of the doorway, the lamps hanging slightly above eye level. Perhaps most startling of all, she saw the sky through the small opening that let in light. A patch of blue she had not been able to gaze at directly for so long. Her first response was not to study herself, but to praise God. Words of gratitude rose from her like a song too long held back. Those nearby heard her voice, filled with a joy that was not loud in a harsh way, but bright and clear, like water newly released from a blocked spring. Not everyone in the synagogue knew what to do with this sudden goodness. The leader of the synagogue, concerned with the order of the day, spoke with irritation. "There are 6 days for work," he told the people. "Come on those days to be healed, not on the Sabbath." His words were directed outward, but their edge pressed toward the center of the room, where she stood, straight now, but freshly aware of how others still saw her. Jesus answered him, his tone firm but not wild. He reminded them that even on the Sabbath, they would untie their ox or donkey and lead it out to give it water. Simple acts of care did not cease because the day was holy. They were part of what made the day holy. "Then should not this woman," he said, "a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" A daughter of Abraham. The phrase wrapped her in a new name. For years, many had seen only her bent shape, her limitation, the slowness of her steps. Now Jesus spoke of her as part of the ancient promise, part of the family of faith, honored by the God who had called Abraham and his descendants. Those who had opposed him felt embarrassed. The people, Luke says, were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. They saw not just a straightened back, but a restored dignity, a life no longer defined by curvature and limitation. As the gathering ended, the woman stepped toward the doorway, feeling the space around her in an entirely new way. The path home was the same path she had walked bent for nearly 2 decades, yet every familiar object met her from a new angle. Trees seemed taller and kinder, the sky more open. The faces of neighbors, even those who did not know what to say, met her eyes instead of looking over her head. When she reached her home, she moved through its doorway without the careful sideways turn she had learned to use. She could stand at her work table and see, without strain, the far corner of the room. Tasks that had once required painful adjustments could now be done with a simple motion. But perhaps the deepest shift was one no one else could see. The way her heart, long pressed down by the weight of her condition, now lifted in quiet relief. If you have carried something for a long time, an ache in your body, a heaviness in your mind, a story that has bent your sense of who you are, you might feel close to this woman as you listen. You may know what it is to move through rooms in ways that are shaped by old injuries, to live with the sense that other people have gotten used to your pain as if it were simply part of the furniture. Here again, how Jesus saw her. He did not just notice her shape. He called her forward, spoke freedom over her, and named her a daughter of Abraham. He gave her back not only a straight spine, but a lifted place in the story of God's people. Tonight, as you lie where you are, your body may not change in an instant. Your circumstances may remain. But you can let this image rest beside you. A quiet synagogue, a woman rising to her full height after years of being bowed down. A teacher who delights in freeing what has been bound. Feel your own back supported by the bed beneath you. Let your shoulders drop a little deeper into the pillow. With each slow breath, imagine another small weight slipping from your posture. An old word someone spoke over you, a label you did not choose, a burden you have carried alone. You may not be able to straighten every part of your life in a single moment. Yet you can rest in the knowledge that there is one who sees you fully and speaks dignity over you, even here, even now. As sleep begins to draw gently near, evening had come to the hills, and with it a kind of quiet that only Saltutosam's wide open land can hold. The heat of the day slipped away little by little, leaving the rocks cool to the touch and the air faintly scented with dust and wild thyme. Above, the sky deepened into a rich, dark blue, and one by one, stars began to appear, small and steady. On a slope not far from a village, a shepherd stood counting. His flock had grazed all afternoon, moving slowly from patch to patch across the rugged pasture. He knew their habits, the way some favored the low, lush grass near the stream, the way others preferred higher ground where the breeze moved more freely. He had called to them throughout the day, his voice traveling easily across the distance, familiar and reassuring. Now, as night folded over the hills, he guided them toward a sheepfold, a simple pen made of stacked stones with a narrow opening, where he could watch them come in one by one. His staff rested in his hand, not only as a tool for guiding, but as a reminder to any watching eye that these were not stray animals. They were guarded, known, and claimed. He spread his arms slightly as he stood at the entrance, letting each sheep pass under his gaze. Their wool brushed against the rough stones and his cloak as they squeezed through. He murmured softly to calm the more skittish ones, giving them each a moment of recognition as they entered the safety of the fold. 97, 98, 99. He paused, his brow furrowed. One was missing. In the fold, the gathered sheep shifted and settled, hooves scraping lightly on stone. They were safe, penned in, their bodies forming a soft, breathing wall of warmth and quiet sounds. But the count in his mind did not match the sight before his eyes. He ran it again without speaking. Groups of 10, then the smaller remainder, the familiar pattern he had used since he was young. The same answer came back. One was not here. He knew which one. Shepherds often name their animals not only by number, but by small traits. A dark patch near the ear, a particular bleat, a habit of lagging or running ahead. This one had always been a bit curious, drawn to the edges, more willing than the others to follow an interesting scent or a winding trail. During the day, the shepherd had kept an eye on it, gently guiding it back when it wandered too far. Somewhere between the light and the dark, it had slipped beyond his immediate sight. He could have stayed. 99 sheep safe in the fold was no small thing. He could have told himself that one lost animal was simply the cost of doing this work, that it was too dark now, too risky to go back out among the rocks and shadows. The hills held their own dangers, steep drops, hidden holes, and in some places, the low patience of predators who also woke with the night. But as Luke 15:4 hints, this shepherd's heart did not rest easily with almost. He stepped inside the fold long enough to settle the flock, speaking to them in low tones, making sure the entrance was secure. Their bodies pressed together in the darkness, the soft sound of their breathing like distant waves against a shore. Then he turned and went back out into the night, staff in hand, leaving the warmth behind for the chill of open hills. The stars were clearer now, scattered thickly across the sky. His sandals met the uneven ground with practiced care. He moved along the paths he and the flock had walked earlier, scanning the darker edges where a small body might be caught or resting. He called out, his voice carrying the same pattern it had in daylight, only softer now, less for leading a crowd and more for finding one. Somewhere, not far, but not near, a faint bleat answered. He followed the sound. Stepping over rocks and through low, scratchy bushes, the land fell away in a shallow dip, where thorns grew denser and the ground widened into a little hollow. There, caught in a tangle of bramble, was the missing sheep. Its wool had snagged on thorns. It had struggled, twisting and pulling, only driving the branches deeper into its fleece. Its sides rose and fell quickly, breath sharp with fear and effort. When it saw the shepherd's silhouette against the starlit sky, it bleated again, a sound that carried both recognition and distress. The shepherd's heart softened at the sight. He did not scold. He did not stand at a distance and demand that the sheep free itself. He knelt, feeling the sting of thorns against his own hands as he carefully loosened each branch. The brambles tugged at his skin, leaving small scratches, but he kept working, speaking in low murmurs meant to reassure. At last, the sheep came free, its legs unsteady. For a moment it swayed, as if unsure whether it could trust its own body to hold it. The shepherd slid his arms beneath it, lifting it onto his shoulders. Its weight rested against the back of his neck, its legs hanging down in front of his chest. He adjusted his grip so it would not slip, the way one would settle a sleeping child before a long walk. He rose. The path back to the fold lay ahead, up out of the dip, over the stones, around the thicker brush. His muscles felt the added weight, but his steps were sure. The lost one, once frightened and trembling, now lay still, its head near his ear, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and the gentle cadence of his voice as he walked. When he reached the sheepfold, the night had grown darker still. The stars seemed even closer. The world narrowed to their light, the stone walls, and the gathered flock inside. He stepped into the entrance and lowered the recovered sheep to the ground. It stumbled once, then found its footing and moved in among the others, pressing its body against familiar wool, the circle closing around it. The shepherd smiled. Relief ran through him like warmth after cold. He called to a neighbor not far away, his voice carrying across the quiet land with an edge of joy. "Rejoice with me," he might have said, just as Jesus described in Luke 15:6. "I have found my lost sheep." The night around them was still, but the fold was complete again. One absence, now filled, made the whole small world of that hillside feel more at peace. Later, when Jesus told this story to those who questioned why he welcomed people they considered undesirable, he spoke of heaven rejoicing over one sinner who repents, over one heart that turns back, one life that is lifted from thorns and carried home. The joy, he said, is greater over the one who returns than over the 99 who did not wander. Not because the 99 are unloved, but because the heart of the shepherd cannot remain indifferent when even one is far. If you listen tonight feeling lost in your own way, caught in habits you wish you could loosen, tangled in worries or regrets that scratch at your peace, you might see yourself in that small sheep. Perhaps you did not mean to wander quite so far. Perhaps life simply pulled you down paths that seemed harmless until you realized how stuck you had become. This story whispers that you are not abandoned in that place. The one who counts does not shrug at your absence. He notices. He comes looking, not with anger, but with a determined care that is willing to face the dark and the rough ground for your sake. You may also find yourself among the 99, safe for the moment, but wondering if your concerns are seen in a world where so many others seem in greater trouble. The story assures you that the same shepherd who goes after one does not forget the rest. His care is large enough to hold all of you at once. As you lie where you are now, let the image of that shepherd returning under the stars stay close. Shoulders bearing the gentle weight of the one who is lost, feet moving steadily toward the fold, voice soft with quiet gladness. Imagine the fold as a place of warmth, of breathing bodies at rest, of a gate watched by someone who does not sleep carelessly. Feel your own body sinking into the mattress, like that sheep settling in among its companions. Your heart may still feel a little unsteady, your thoughts a bit tangled. But for this night, you can let yourself be carried by a care deeper than your confusion, a watchfulness that does not grow tired. With each slow breath, imagine the rough hills fading into the distance, the thorns falling away, the sky above wide and calm. The shepherd has found you. The fold is near. You are allowed now to close your eyes and rest. The story begins, as Jesus tells it in Luke 15:11-32, with a father and two sons who live together on a piece of land that has known their footsteps for years. Morning after morning, the sun rises over the fields, catching on the tops of trees and the tiled roofs of the house. Workers move between vineyard and pasture. Tools lean where they are always kept. The rhythms are familiar. Planting, tending, harvesting, sharing meals at the long table in the courtyard. The younger son watches it all with a restless heart. He sees the fields, but his mind wanders beyond them. He hears the lowing of cattle, the laughter of servants, the steady footsteps of his older brother. But he imagines other streets, other markets, other faces. The steady goodness of the life around him begins to feel in his thoughts, like a confinement. One day he goes to his father with a request that falls on the household like a sudden gust of unwelcome wind. "Father, give me my share of the inheritance," he says. Inheritance is usually something received after a father's life is finished. To ask for it now is to say, in a way, "I want what you can give me more than I want you." The words are sharp, yet the father does not argue. He does not punish or push the son away. Quietly, he divides what he has between them. Soon after, the younger son gathers his share: coin, possessions, animals that can be sold along the way, and leaves. The road away from home is dusty and bright. He walks with a kind of excited relief at first, the way someone might feel when they step out of a door they think has held them too long. Behind him, the house grows smaller. In front of him lies a far country he has never seen. Time passes. In that distant place, the younger son spends freely. New clothes, rich food, nights filled with music and laughter, friends who appear as long as the coin keeps flowing. The days blur into one another: pleasure, noise, the feeling that nothing will run out. But eventually, it does. The money dwindles. The objects he bought lose their shine. The people who once crowded his table drift away when he has nothing left to offer. Around the same time, a severe famine hits the land. Prices rise, work grows scarce, hunger sharpens. He hires himself out to a citizen of that country who sends him to the fields to feed pigs. For someone from his people who considered pigs unclean animals, this is more than just unpleasant work. It is a sign of how far he has fallen. He stands in the mud and slop, watching the animals eat the pods thrown to them, and finds himself longing to fill his own stomach with the same food. No one gives him anything. The excitement that once lit his imagination is gone. In its place is a dull ache of regret and a steady, pressing hunger. He is alone in a land that is not his, surrounded by animals that cannot share his language, and memories of home arrive not as faint background scenes, but as sharp, vivid pictures. Bread on the table, servants with enough to spare, his father's face in the lamplight. In that place, among the pigs and the emptiness, he comes to himself. How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, he thinks, and here I am starving to death. The words rise from a depth he had not been listening to before. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." He rehearses the speech in his mind as he begins the journey back. Each step on the road home is heavier than the ones that brought him away. His clothes are worn, his sandals are thin. His body feels the miles in a way it did not when he first raced into the future. Yet over everything, over the shame, the fear, the uncertainty, is a simple hope that in his Father's house, even the lowest place is better than this far country. Back at home, The father has never stopped looking down the road. Day after day, he goes to the place where the horizon is visible. A rise beyond the fields, a low wall near the gate. His eyes scan the distance, not with frantic panic, but with a persistent, aching hope. Workers come and go. Seasons shift. The older son moves faithfully through his tasks. Still, the father keeps watch. One day, as the light slants just so across the land, he sees a figure far away. The walk is slower, the shoulders more bowed, but the outline is unmistakable to a heart that has longed for it. While the younger son is still a long way off, the father recognizes him. Compassion fills him, not resentment, not "I told you so," not a calculated stiffness. He runs. In that culture, older men did not often run in public. It meant lifting his robe, exposing his ankles, and throwing aside the dignity others expected him to maintain. But his love is larger than his concern for appearances. His feet slap the ground in a rhythm he has not felt since his son was small. Dust rises around his ankles as he closes the distance. The son, seeing him approach, begins his prepared speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." He does not reach the part about being made a servant. The father has already wrapped his arms around him, pulling him close in an embrace that smells of home, of wool and dust and familiar skin. He kisses him. His touch says what his words will soon echo. "You are not a servant to be rehired. You are my child, returned." He calls to the servants. "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Robe for honor, ring for restored place in the family, sandals for someone who belongs, not a barefoot stranger hired for a day's work. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The courtyard fills with sounds of preparation. Water poured, meat cooking, music tuning up, laughter starting to bubble. Lamps are lit as the sky darkens, their warm light throwing soft shapes on the walls. The younger son, freshly washed and dressed, breathes in the sense of the feast, the feel of clean cloth on his skin, the solid touch of his father's hand on his shoulder. Each small detail whispers the same truth. Grace has welcomed him home. Outside, the older son returns from the fields. He hears music and dancing before he sees the reason. A servant tells him his brother has come home and that the father has killed the fattened calf. Anger tightens in him. For years he has worked, obeyed, stayed. To see celebration lavished on the one who wandered feels like a wound. He stays outside, his feet planted in the dark. The father comes out to him too. He does not ignore the son who remained. He listens to his frustration, his sense of injustice. "All these years I've been slaving for you," the older son says, "and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends." The father's reply is gentle, steady. "My son," he says, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." The faithfulness of the older son has never gone unnoticed. The father's love has not favored one and forgotten the other. "But we had to celebrate and be glad," he adds, "because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The story leaves the ending open. We are not told whether the older son enters the house or stays outside. But we see clearly the heart of the father, running toward the broken, stepping out toward the resentful, holding both sons in the wide circle of his grace. Tonight, you may feel like the younger child, far from where you meant to be, tired from choices that did not lead you where you hoped. Or you may feel like the older one, standing in the dark just outside celebration, wondering if your quiet faithfulness has really been seen. This story gently reminds you that there is a Father who watches the road, who runs toward returning hearts, and who steps out to meet those who struggle in the shadows of comparison and hurt. His house is not only for the triumphant, it is for the tired, the returning, the confused, the loyal, and the lost. As you settle now, you might picture that courtyard at the end of the day. Lamps glowing, music softened by distance, a table laid with more than enough, and a Father whose eyes keep turning to the doorway, always ready to welcome whoever steps through. Let your own breathing fall into a calm, unhurried rhythm, like footsteps finally turning home after a long journey. Feel the surface beneath you holding your weight, the way the ground of that house held both sons, whichever direction they came from. With each exhale, you can let go a little of whatever makes you feel far away. Regret, resentment, fear, and allow yourself, just for this night, to rest in the thought of a welcome that does not wear out. The afternoon light in the village had turned soft, the kind that makes dust in the air look almost golden. Shadows stretched longer across the packed earth of the lanes. Women finished rinsing clothes at the well, lifting heavy jars back onto their shoulders. Men stacked tools against walls, wiping sweat from their brows with the backs of their hands as the heat began to ease. Along one of those lanes, children's voices rose, bright, unguarded threads of sound that wove through the quieter tones of the grown-ups. Small feet pattered over the ground. A stone rolled. A stick scratched a wandering line in the dust. Laughter burst out and then disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by another small discovery, another game only they fully understood. Jesus was in the village that day, as Luke 18:15-17 tells us. He had been speaking with adults, answering questions, listening to worries, teaching in the steady way that had begun to draw people from many places. The circle around him was made mostly of grown faces, lined by years of work, care, and long nights. Their bowed shoulders and tired eyes told their own stories. But at the edges, something else was happening. A mother, her robe faded from many washings, watched her small son tracing shapes in the dust with his finger. She had heard what people said about Jesus, that he spoke of God like a father who actually saw them, that he healed those who had been overlooked, that he did not brush aside the poor or the tired. A longing stirred in her, not only for herself, but for this child with dust on his toes and hair that never quite stayed smooth. She picked him up. He squirmed at first, then looped his arms around her neck. Another mother did the same. A father, hesitant but drawn, took his daughter's hand. Soon, more parents gathered their children, with sleep-heavy eyes, with scraped knees, with sticky fingers and faint milk on their breath, and began to move toward where Jesus stood. They were not looking for a long lesson or a place in a crowd. They wanted him to lay his hands on their little ones and bless them, to speak a word over them that might anchor their futures in something stronger than luck or the uncertain kindness of the world. As they approached, the disciples saw them coming. Their first reaction was not delight. It was concern, the practical kind that rises when you see a careful moment at risk of becoming noisy and complicated. Jesus was teaching. Important questions were being asked and answered. To the disciples, the sudden cluster of parents and children looked like an interruption, a distraction from work that seemed more serious. They rebuked them. The words may not have been shouted, but their tone carried the message clearly enough. This is not the time, not the place. Take them away. Come back later. The parents slowed. Some stepped back, their grip tightening on small hands, their eyes lowering under the weight of being turned aside. The children, sensing the tension without fully understanding it, grew quieter, some hiding their faces in their parents' robes. Jesus saw it all. He watched the disciples' hands, held out in a blocking gesture. He watched the parents' faces, drawn and hesitant. He watched the children, some still reaching in innocent curiosity toward him, some shrinking back. And his own heart stirred in a way that would not leave things as they were. He called the children to him. "Let the little children come to me," he said, "and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." The words slipped past the disciples' attempts to manage the moment. They settled over the whole group like a warm blanket laid over cold shoulders. Do not hinder them. The ones others thought should wait outside. Be quiet. Stay away from the center. Jesus drew them in. Parents moved forward again, a little cautiously at first. Children came closer, some walking on their own, some carried. Jesus lowered himself to their height. He did not stand above them with distant formality. He bent, crouched, sat, making space where small hands could reach his robe, where small eyes could meet his without craning their necks. He placed his hands on them, one by one. A palm rested gently on a tangled head of hair. Fingers brushed lightly over a tiny shoulder. Each touch was deliberate, not rushed, as if the child in front of him were the only one in the room. Over a little boy whose father worked long hours and whose mother worried about food, his blessing fell like unseen shelter. Over a girl who had already heard harsh words about her place in the world, his gaze carried a different story, that she was seen, valued, and welcomed. Over a baby half asleep against a mother's chest, his hand rested briefly, leaving behind a peace that the child could not yet name, but would carry all the same. "The kingdom of God," he said, still close to them, "belongs to such as these." He did not mean that children were perfect. He meant that their way of receiving, open, trusting, unpolished, was a window into how God's reign works. "Truly, I tell you," he added, "anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." Not earn it, not argue their way into it. Receive it. Around him, the disciples watched. Their own lives had been shaped by effort, responsibility, the need to do and to prove. Yet here was their teacher, framing small, unimportant by world standards children as examples of what it meant to belong. For the children, the moment may have felt simple. They knew what it was to be held, to climb into a lap, to lean their full weight onto someone stronger without worrying if they were too heavy. To them, resting in the arms of someone they trusted was not a strategy. It was second nature. For the adults, something deeper stirred. Some had spent years trying to carry everything themselves. Worry about crops, about taxes, about illness, about old regrets. They had learned to tighten their shoulders, to keep their voices steady, to pretend they were not tired. Watching their children near Jesus, accepting his blessing without self-consciousness, they glimpsed another way of being. You might imagine yourself there now, standing a little apart at first, watching from the edge of the circle. Your own life has likely taught you to be careful, to measure your words, to manage your image, to brace yourself for disappointment. Yet as you watch the children move close, you might feel some hidden, younger part of you respond. The part that still longs simply to be held, In this scene, Jesus does not ask the children to grow up faster, to explain themselves, or to earn attention. He simply makes space and gives it. He places his hands on them, not because they have achieved anything, but because they are loved. Tonight, as you lie where you are, the weight you carry may feel very grown up. Responsibilities, deadlines, relationships, health, memories that tug at you when the house is quiet. But just for these moments, you are invited to receive, not perform, to let yourself be, in spirit, a little more like those children on the village path. Picture yourself stepping forward, not with a polished speech, but with whatever you have. Your tiredness, your questions, your anxieties that flare when the lights go out. See the way his gaze does not harden or turn away. Feel the imagined warmth of a hand resting lightly on your shoulder, over your heart, along the line of your worried thoughts. You do not have to solve anything as you breathe in and out. You do not have to untangle every knot before you are allowed to rest. Like a child leaning into the steady chest of someone they trust, you can let more of your weight sink into the mattress beneath you, into the quiet of the room, into the assurance that you are not unwelcome or in the way. With each slow breath, imagine the village fading into evening, the lane growing still, the dust settling, the last echo of children's laughter drifting away on the breeze. The blessings spoken linger in the air, like a soft echo that does not quite vanish. Let that echo reach you too, wherever you are. Let it soften the lines of your face, ease the clench in your jaw, and make space for your eyes to grow heavy. Like a child finally carried inside after a long day, you are allowed now to stop holding yourself up so tightly. The kingdom you could never earn is something you can simply lean into as sleep, gentle and unforced, begins to draw near. The road out of Jerusalem stretched into the late afternoon, a pale ribbon winding between low hills that had seen many travelers come and go. The city lay behind, its walls catching the fading light, its gates beginning to cast longer shadows. The air still held the faint tang of dust and smoke, of recent crowds and heavy days. Two men walked side by side along that road. Their steps were slow, not from physical exhaustion alone, but from the weight of thoughts that had not yet found a place to rest. One was named Cleopas, as Luke 24:18 notes. The other's name is not recorded, but his sorrow is. They had followed Jesus. They had listened to his teaching, watched his kindness, seen hope rise in places where it had seemed impossible. Then came the arrest, the trial, the cross. The last few days had been a blur of fear, grief, confusion, and rumors of something they could hardly bring themselves to believe. Women from their group had gone to the tomb at dawn and found it empty. Angels, they said, had spoken of him as alive. Others had gone to check and found the tomb just as the women had described, but did not see him. Now, as the sun leaned westward, Cleopas and his companion left the city, heading toward a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles away, as Luke 24:13 records. The road was not crowded. A few other travelers moved in the distance, figures small against the slopes, donkeys carrying packs, the occasional cart. The land around them rolled gently, with patches of cultivated ground and pockets of wild growth where birds flitted in and out. They talked as they walked. Words tumbled out, snatches of recent events, questions that trailed off into silence, hopes they had dared to hold now lying fragile between them. Every few steps, one would gesture toward the city behind them, then let his arm drop again, as if the explanation they sought kept slipping away, just as they turned to grasp it. While they were discussing these things, another traveler came up and began to walk beside them. His footsteps fell into rhythm with theirs as naturally as if they had planned it. He looked like any other man on the road. Dust on his sandals, cloak brushed by the same wind, face turned slightly down against the glare. He asked what they were talking about and why they looked so sad. They stopped, a little surprised. Had he not been in Jerusalem? Did he not know what had happened? Cleopas turned to him and asked, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" the stranger asked. They told him. They spoke of Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. They spoke of how the chief priests and rulers had handed him over to be sentenced to death, and how he had been crucified. They spoke of their own hearts, too, perhaps without fully realizing it. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped. Those 3 words carry so much, a past tense that aches. You may know that feeling when something you trusted to turn out well seems to have broken instead, when the future you pictured in your mind fades like smoke. Cleopas and his companion walked under the same sky they always had, yet it felt thinner, less sure. They added the pieces about the women, the empty tomb, the angel's message that he was alive, the verification by others. But the facts, stacked together, did not form a clear picture yet. They were still in that in-between place. Too much had happened to return to simple life as before. But not enough had settled in their understanding to let hopeful joy take root. The stranger listened. Then he began to speak. His voice did not rebuke in harsh tones, but there was a clear, steady firmness in it. "How foolish you are," he said, "and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken." He reminded them that the Messiah's path, foretold long ago, included suffering before glory. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself, as Luke 24:27 recalls. As he spoke, the road ahead seemed a little less heavy. The same stones lay in their path. The same distance stretched between Jerusalem and Emmaus. But their hearts, which had been like tightly clenched fists around disappointment, began to loosen just a little. The stories they had known since childhood, about Abraham, about David, about promises and covenants and faithful love, were being gently woven together into a pattern that cast the recent days in a new light. The sun slipped lower. The color of the sky shifted from bright to softer tones. Fields on either side of the road glowed briefly where the last rays brushed them, then cooled into shadow. The village of Emmaus came into view, a small cluster of houses, smoke rising from cook fires, faint sounds of evening routines drifting into the air. As they approached the village, the stranger seemed ready to continue on. He did not push himself into their home or assume welcome. He simply walked as though there were more road ahead for him. But Cleopas and his companion felt something they could not easily name. The day was almost over, and the night would soon be deep. They did not want this conversation, this unusual warmth in their hearts, to end at the edge of the village path. "Stay with us," they urged him, "for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. Inside the small house, the air was different from the open road. The stones held the day's warmth. The table was simple. A few dishes, a bit of bread, perhaps a small dish of oil, a cup. The light came from a lamp on a stand, its flame steady, casting gentle shapes on the walls. Outside, the village settled deeper into quiet. Inside, the 3 of them settled at the table. He took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. In that everyday motion, the kind they had seen many times in other meals, something more than ordinary happened. Their eyes, which had been kept from recognizing him on the road, were opened. They knew him. The stranger, the teacher on the path, the one who had seemed to appear out of nowhere, was Jesus, the one they had mourned, the one they had hoped in, the one they thought they had lost. In the simple act of breaking bread, their hearts and their eyes caught up with what their souls had been sensing. He had been with them all along. And then, just as suddenly, he disappeared from their sight. The room fell quiet. The lamplight flickered as if nothing had changed. The bread still lay on the table, broken. Yet everything in them was different. Were not our hearts burning within us? They said to each other, while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us. The same road that had felt heavy with sorrow and confusion was now, in memory, threaded through with the warmth of his presence. Their questions had not all been answered in neat lines, but they no longer felt abandoned in them. They had not recognized him by the shape of his face or the sound of his first greeting. They had recognized him by the way their hearts had responded, by the way the bread had broken, by the way hope had quietly returned and sat down beside their grief. They rose and went back to Jerusalem, even though night had settled. There they found the others and shared what had happened, how Jesus had appeared to Simon, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. As you listen to this story tonight, you may feel your own version of that Emmaus weariness, a day, a month, or a year that has not turned out as you thought it would, prayers that seem to have gone unanswered, hopes that sit in your chest like cooled ashes. You may have walked roads that felt long and unclear, wondering if God had slipped away somewhere behind you. This chapter whispers that even on those roads, you are not walking alone. Jesus came alongside two ordinary disciples in their confusion, not demanding that they understand everything before he joined them, but joining them so that understanding could slowly grow. He did not reveal himself in a blinding flash, but in companionship, in conversation, and finally, in the quiet breaking of bread at an ordinary table. Tonight, as you lie where you are, you can picture that small room in Emmaus, the lamplight steady, the table set with simple food, two men whose hearts have shifted from heaviness to a deep, quiet wonder. Outside, the village night is hushed. Inside, the last warmth of the bread lingers on their tongues, and the memory of his presence steadies their breathing. You may not see all the answers you long for, but you can rest in the thought that the one who walked that road still comes beside tired travelers, still sits at their tables, still turns cold disappointment into a slow-burning hope. Let your own breath fall into a gentle rhythm now, like footsteps finally slowing at the end of a long journey. Feel the road of this day ease out from under your feet as you sink into the bed beneath you. With each exhale, imagine laying down one more piece of your confusion on that Emmaus table, trusting that you are held in a story larger than what you can see. The day is nearly over. The night is here. And like those two who discovered they had not been abandoned after all, you are free now to close your eyes, to let your heart grow quiet, and to rest in a presence that keeps watch even when you sleep. The long journey through these stories now comes to a quiet close. Lamps are low, the night outside your window has settled, and your heart has walked a long way through fields and villages, over water and dusty roads, beside Jesus and the people he loved so gently. Thank you for keeping company through each chapter, for letting these scenes from Luke move at a slow, restful pace through your thoughts. You have sat in Nazareth synagogue, in Capernaum's courtyard, on hillsides, and along shorelines. You have watched mercy reach for the poor, the tired, the ashamed, the wandering, the overlooked. Somewhere in all of that, there has been space for you too. So now, in this last stretch before sleep, receive a blessing. May the one who calmed the storm on Galilee's lake calm the waves inside you tonight. May the Father who ran to his lost child meet you kindly in every place you feel far away. May the shepherd who goes after one small, frightened sheep keep watch over you and those you love. May the gentle hands that welcome children rest over your anxious thoughts and make them soft. Where today has been heavy, may its weight slip from your shoulders as you breathe out. Where regrets still speak loudly, may mercy speak a little louder. Where tomorrow feels uncertain, may you remember that you are seen and held, even in what you cannot yet see. As your eyes grow heavy, you do not have to hold yourself together. You are free for this night, simply to rest, like a child safely home, like a traveler who has found a warm room and a quiet table, like a disciple whose heart burns gently with hope, even when answers are incomplete. May your sleep be deep and untroubled. May your dreams be gentle. And when morning comes, may you wake with a quieter heart, knowing that you have never walked alone. Amen.